The summer of 1872 came to Blackridge Valley like a fever, hot, relentless, and carrying death in its wake. Ethan Vance was 12 years old the day he learned that monsters don't hide under beds. They ride horses. They wear fine coats. They smile while they destroy everything you love. The Vance homestead sat at the eastern edge of the valley, where the grasslands met the pine-covered foothills. It wasn't much. A modest ranch house, a barn weathered gray by wind and sun, corrals holding a few dozen cattle, and fields of wheat that glowed golden in the afternoon light. But it was honest land, worked by honest hands. Thomas Vance had built it from nothing, and his wife Mary had turned it into a home where laughter echoed through the rooms and the smell of fresh bread greeted every morning. Ethan had grown up believing the world was fundamentally fair. That hard work brought reward. That good people were protected by something larger than themselves. Maybe not heaven, but at least by neighbors, by community, by the simple decency that holds civilization together. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The riders appeared just after noon when the sun hung high and merciless. Ethan was in the north pasture, mending fence with his father. The work was hot and monotonous, stretching wire, hammering staples, moving post to post under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. His hands were blistered, his shirt soaked with sweat, but he didn't complain. Thomas Vance didn't raise complainers. "You're getting stronger," his father said, watching Ethan wrestle a stubborn fence post into alignment. Thomas was a big man, broad-shouldered and weathered, with hands like leather and eyes that crinkled when he smiled. "Another year or two, you'll be doing this on your own." "I can do it now," Ethan replied, the pride of youth burning in his chest. Thomas laughed, a warm sound that made everything feel safe. "I don't doubt it, son, but there's no rush. We've got time." They didn't. The dust cloud appeared first, a brown smudge rising from the valley road, growing larger and darker as it approached. Thomas straightened, shading his eyes with one hand. His smile faded. "Go to the house," he said quietly. "Pa?" "Go to the house. Tell your mother to lock the doors." There was something in his father's voice that turned Ethan's blood cold. He'd never heard that tone before, flat, hard, empty of all warmth. The voice of a man preparing for something terrible. "Pa, who? Go, now!" Ethan ran. His boots pounded the dry earth as he sprinted across the pasture, jumped the creek, and raced up the gentle slope toward the house. His mother was hanging laundry, white sheets snapping in the breeze like surrender flags. She saw his face and dropped the clothespins. "Ethan? What's wrong?" "Pa said to lock the doors. Riders coming." Mary Vance didn't hesitate. She grabbed Ethan's arm and pulled him toward the house, her grip iron tight despite her small frame. She was a delicate woman, fine-boned and gentle, but in that moment Ethan felt the steel beneath her softness. They were halfway to the door when the riders burst into the yard. There were 7 of them, mounted on fine horses that kicked up clouds of dust as they circled the house like wolves around cornered prey. At their head rode 3 men who looked so similar they could only be brothers, tall, lean, with the kind of cruel handsomeness that made people uncomfortable. They wore expensive clothes, clean despite the ride, and their gun belts gleamed with oil and care. The eldest brother, Ethan would later learn his name was Clayton Reeves, sat his horse with the casual arrogance of a man who'd never been told no. His eyes swept the homestead with the calculating gaze of someone appraising property. "Thomas Vance," he called out, his voice carrying across the yard. "We need to talk." Thomas emerged from behind the barn, walking slowly, deliberately. He'd picked up his rifle, an old Henry repeater that had seen him through the war. He didn't point it at anyone, but he held it ready. "My answer hasn't changed, Reeves." Clayton smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Now, Thomas, don't be hasty. We're here as friends. Friends don't ride up to a man's home 7 strong and armed. We're here to make you rich." Clayton leaned forward in his saddle. "The railroad's coming through, the whole valley's about to boom, and we're buying up land to consolidate. I'm prepared to offer you 3 times what this place is worth. It's not for sale. Everything's for sale at the right price. Not this. This is my family's land. My son will work it someday, and his sons after him. No amount of money changes that." Clayton's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "You're being foolish, Thomas. Progress is coming whether you like it or not. Men who stand in its way get crushed. Then I'll stand and be damned to you. The yard fell silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Clayton's two brothers shifted in their saddles. The younger one, Marcus, had his hand drifting toward his pistol. The middle brother, William, watched with the dead-eyed patience of a snake. Last chance, Clayton said softly. Take the money. Pack up your family. Walk away while you still can. Get off my land! Mary's hand tightened on Ethan's shoulder. She was pulling him toward the door, trying to be subtle about it, trying not to draw attention. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. He wanted to run to his father, to stand beside him, but his mother's grip was unyielding. Clayton sighed, as if genuinely disappointed. You know what I admire about you, Thomas? Your principles. Real shame they're going to get you killed. Is that a threat? It's a prophecy. Clayton raised his hand. For one frozen moment, nothing happened. Then he dropped it, and the world exploded into violence. Marcus drew first, his pistol clearing leather with practiced speed. The shot cracked across the yard, impossibly loud. Thomas stumbled backward, the Henry falling from his hands. A red stain bloomed across his chest. No! Mary screamed, and suddenly she was running toward her husband even as he fell to his knees in the dust. Ma, don't! Ethan lunged after her, but she was already gone, already crossing the yard with her arms outstretched. William shot her before she made it halfway. The bullet caught her high in the back and spun her around. She crumpled like a puppet with cut strings, her white dress turning red, her hand reaching toward Ethan even as the light left her eyes. Ethan couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what he was seeing. His parents, his strong, capable parents, were lying in the dirt, bleeding, dying, while 7 men on horses watched with calm indifference. Thomas tried to rise, got one knee under him, reached for the Henry. Clayton rode forward and kicked him in the face, sending him sprawling. Then he dismounted, walked over to where the rifle lay, and picked it up. You should have taken the money, he said, and shot Thomas Vance through the head. Ethan ran. He didn't make a conscious decision to do it. His body simply moved, operating on pure animal instinct. He bolted for the barn, expecting any second to feel a bullet tear through him, to join his parents in the dust. But the shot never came. Behind him, he heard Clayton laugh. Let him go, the land baron called out. Just a boy. He'll die in the wilderness, or he'll learn to keep his mouth shut. Either way, he's no threat. Ethan made it to the barn, crashed through the side door, and kept running. Out the back, through the equipment shed, into the tree line at the edge of the property. He ran until his lungs burned, until his legs gave out, until he collapsed in a dry creek bed and vomited into the dirt. Then he crawled into the hollow beneath a fallen cottonwood tree and didn't move for 3 days. The first night he heard the fire. Even from his hiding place 2 miles away, he could see the orange glow against the sky, could smell the smoke on the wind. They were burning his home, erasing the Vance family from existence as thoroughly as if they'd never been. Ethan lay in the hollow and shook, his teeth chattering despite the warm night. He was in shock. He dimly understood, but the knowledge did nothing to stop the tremors that racked his thin frame. His mind kept replaying it. The shots. His mother's hand reaching toward him, his father's skull snapping back as the bullet. He threw up again, though there was nothing left in his stomach. On the second day, thirst drove him to movement. He crawled to a nearby spring and drank until he was sick, then drank some more. He found wild berries and ate them mechanically, tasting nothing. He moved like a ghost through the forest, directionless, purposeless. On the third day, something inside him hardened. He was sitting on a boulder, watching the sun rise over the valley, when it happened. The grief and shock and fear that had paralyzed him began to crystallize into something else, something cold and sharp and utterly focused. The Reeves brothers had killed his parents. They had murdered them in broad daylight, in front of witnesses, and they had ridden away laughing, and they would get away with it. Ethan knew this with absolute certainty. The Reeves family owned half the valley. They had money, power, hired guns. The sheriff, if he even investigated, would find nothing. Witnesses would suddenly remember being somewhere else. Evidence would disappear. Justice would be a word spoken by people too afraid to demand it. But Ethan wasn't afraid anymore. Fear had burned away in the hollow, leaving only purpose. He stood up, turned his back on the valley, and started walking into the wilderness. He had no plan, no destination, only a single thought that played over and over in his mind like a prayer. I'll come back. I don't know how, but I'll come back. And when I do, they'll pay for what they did. Every single one. The town of Blackridge sat in the valley's heart like a rotten tooth in an otherwise healthy mouth. It had been a decent place once, back when honest ranchers and farmers made up most of the population. But in the years since the war, it had been slowly poisoned by the Reeves family's influence. They owned the bank, the general store, the hotel, and half the saloons. They owned the judge, they owned the sheriff, they owned the souls of men too tired or too scared to resist. When news of the Vance killing spread through town, it was met with whispers and downcast eyes. Everyone knew who was responsible. The Reeves brothers didn't even try to hide it. But knowing and speaking are different things, and in Blackridge, silence had become survival. At the funeral, such as it was, only a handful of people showed up. Thomas and Mary Vance were buried in simple pine boxes on a hill overlooking what had been their land. The preacher said the words quickly, nervously, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting the Reeves brothers to appear and object to the proceedings. No one asked about Ethan. No one organized a search party. The boy had either died in the wilderness or fled the territory, and either way, he was gone. Life went on. The Reeves brothers absorbed the Vance property into their growing empire. Within a month, they had surveyors marking out railroad plots and engineers planning routes. Money flowed, the town grew, and everyone pretended they didn't hear the ghosts screaming in the wind. But in the mountains east of the valley, a 12-year-old boy was learning to survive. The first weeks were brutal. Ethan had grown up on a ranch, so he knew something about hard work and self-sufficiency. But ranch work and wilderness survival are different animals entirely. He made every mistake a novice could make, drank from contaminated water and spent 2 days violently ill, built fires that sent up smoke signals visible for miles, left tracks that any half-decent hunter could follow. He should have died a dozen times over. What saved him was stubborn refusal to quit. When the fever from bad water nearly killed him, he crawled to a different stream and kept going. When he ran out of the berries and roots he recognized, he experimented with new plants, making himself sick over and over until he learned what was safe. When the nights turned cold and he had nothing but a thin shirt, he learned to build better shelters, to insulate with pine needles and grass, to survive. The wilderness was a harsh teacher, but a thorough one. By the end of the first month, he could move through the forest without making a sound. He could read tracks, predict weather, find water in seemingly barren country. He learned to make snares from braided grass, to fish with sharpened sticks, to bring down small game with stones thrown with desperate accuracy. He also learned to hate. Every night, sitting by whatever small fire he'd allowed himself, he thought about the Reeves brothers. He replayed the murders in his mind over and over, until every detail was burned into his memory. Clayton's cold smile, Marcus's quick draw, William's dead eyes, the casual cruelty with which they'd destroyed his family. He made a promise to himself. He wouldn't just survive. He'd become something they couldn't ignore, something dangerous. But he was 12 years old, alone, and armed with nothing but rocks and rage. He needed help. He found it 6 months later, in the most unexpected place. The old man's cabin sat in a high mountain valley, so remote that Ethan stumbled upon it by pure chance. He'd been tracking a deer for 2 days, growing increasingly desperate as his supplies dwindled, when he crested a ridge and saw smoke rising from a chimney below. His first instinct was to run. Strangers meant danger. But hunger overrode caution, and he crept closer, thinking maybe he could steal some food when the occupant was asleep. He made it within 50 yards of the cabin before a voice stopped him cold. "You planning to sneak any closer, or are you going to stand there looking hungry?" Ethan froze. The voice had come from directly behind him. Impossible, because he'd been watching his back trail. He spun around and found himself staring at a man who looked like he'd been carved from the mountain itself. He was old, 60 at least, but built like weathered iron, tall and lean, with a gray beard and eyes that missed nothing. He wore buckskins and moccasins, and he held a rifle with the easy familiarity of a man who'd been born with one in his hands. More importantly, the rifle was pointed at Ethan's chest. "Don't shoot," Ethan said, hating how his voice shook. The old man studied him for a long moment. You're that Vance boy, the one everyone thinks is dead. Ethan's eyes widened. How do you... Word travels, even up here. The Reeves brothers killed your folks. You ran. That about sum it up? Yes. And now you're living in the mountains like a wild animal, planning to... What? Wait until you're big enough to go back and get revenge? Ethan said nothing, but his jaw tightened. The old man lowered the rifle. Come on, you look like you could use a meal. His name was Caleb Thorne, and he was a legend Ethan had never heard of. That was by design. Thorne had spent the last 20 years making sure people forgot about him. But before his self-imposed exile, he'd been one of the most feared men west of the Mississippi, a gunfighter and bounty hunter who'd killed 37 men in stand-up fights and never once been wounded. He didn't tell Ethan any of this at first. He just fed the boy, real food, hot and plentiful, and let him sleep in the cabin's loft. For 3 days they barely spoke. Ethan was too suspicious, too feral to trust easily, and Thorne seemed content with silence. On the 4th day, Thorne tossed a revolver on the table. You want revenge? He asked. Pick it up. Ethan stared at the gun. It was a beautiful thing, a Colt .45 with a worn grip and perfect balance. He reached for it slowly, almost reverently. It's heavy, he said. Always is the first time. Now point it at that tree outside and pull the trigger. Ethan did. The recoil nearly broke his wrist, and the shot went wild, tearing bark off a pine 10 feet to the left of his target. Thorne nodded. That's what I thought. You can't even hold the damn thing steady, and you think you're going to go up against professional killers? You'll be dead before you clear leather. Ethan's face burned with shame and anger. Then teach me. Why would I do that? Because... Ethan struggled for words. Because I don't have anyone else. Because I can't do this alone. Because they murdered my family, and no one cares, and if I don't make them pay, no one will. Thorne was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. You know what you're asking for? I teach you to use that gun. I'm teaching you to kill. Once you cross that line, there's no going back. You won't be Ethan Vance anymore. You'll be something else. Something harder. Good, Ethan said flatly. Ethan Vance died in that yard with his parents. Thorne studied the boy's face. The hollowed cheeks, the eyes that had seen too much, the granite determination carved into features still too young for such hardness. He sighed. All right, but we do this my way. No arguments, no shortcuts. You follow my rules or you leave. Understood? Understood. Then we start tomorrow. Get some rest. You're going to need it. The training was worse than anything Ethan had endured in the wilderness. Thorne was a brutal teacher, pushing him past exhaustion, past pain, past the point where most boys would have quit. They started before dawn and worked until after dark, with only brief breaks for meals. First came strength. Thorne had Ethan chopping wood for hours, carrying water from the stream in increasingly heavy buckets, climbing rope until his arms shook with fatigue. A weak man can't hold a gun steady, he explained, and an unsteady gun gets you killed. Then came speed, endless drills, drawing, aiming, dry firing, thousands upon thousands of repetitions until the motion became as natural as breathing. Thorne would throw stones at him without warning, and Ethan had to draw and shoot before they hit. At first, he failed every time. After months of practice, he never missed. Then came accuracy. They started with tin cans at 10 feet, progressed to bottles at 20 yards, eventually to playing cards at 50 paces. Thorne was merciless in his critiques, accepting nothing less than perfection. Out there, you get one chance, he'd say. You miss, you die. Simple as that. But the hardest lessons weren't about guns at all. Most gunfights are won before the first shot, Thorne explained one evening as they cleaned their weapons. It's about psychology, about reading your opponent, about controlling fear, yours and theirs. He taught Ethan to watch hands, not eyes, to recognize the subtle tensing of muscles that preceded a draw, to project calm confidence even when terror screamed through every nerve, to use silence as a weapon, stillness as intimidation. The fastest gun doesn't always win, Thorne said. The smartest one does. The one who controls the situation, who makes his opponent doubt, who waits for the perfect moment. That's the man who walks away. Years passed like this. Ethan's body changed, growing lean and hard and efficient. His hands developed calluses that could handle any tool or weapon without blistering. His eyes learned to track movement in peripheral vision, to spot danger in shadows, to see the world as a battlefield where every position mattered. But more than his body, his mind changed. The grief and rage that had driven him into the mountains didn't disappear. They crystallized into something colder, more focused. He stopped thinking about his parents' deaths emotionally and started thinking about them strategically. Who had pulled the trigger? Who had given the order? Who else had been complicit? How were they protected? What were their weaknesses? He became obsessed with understanding the Reeves brothers. Thorne would occasionally make trips to nearby settlements for supplies, and he'd bring back newspapers and gossip. Ethan absorbed every scrap of information, building detailed mental profiles of his enemies. Clayton Reeves, the eldest, smart, charismatic, the public face of the family business. He owned most of Blackridge's legitimate enterprises and had political ambitions. Married, 2 children, known for his charm and his ruthlessness in equal measure. William Reeves, the middle brother, the enforcer, quiet, methodical, utterly without conscience. He ran the family's less savory operations and had a reputation for making problems disappear. Never married, lived alone on a fortified ranch outside town. Marcus Reeves, the youngest, hot-tempered, arrogant, quick with a gun, but not particularly smart. He fancied himself a gunfighter and had killed 3 men in fair duels. He spent most of his time gambling and drinking in Blackridge's saloons. 3 brothers, 3 different personalities, but all equally guilty. Ethan studied them the way a hunter studies prey, learning their patterns, their habits, their vulnerabilities. And slowly, very slowly, a plan began to form. On a cold spring morning, 15 years after he'd fled into the wilderness, Ethan Vance looked at himself in Thorne's cracked mirror and barely recognized what he saw. He was 27 years old but looked older, weathered by hard living, marked by scars from training accidents and wilderness mishaps. His face had lost all softness, hardened into sharp planes and angles. His eyes were the worst, flat and cold, the eyes of a man who'd long ago made peace with violence. He wore the gun now like it was part of his body, the .45 sitting low on his hip in a hand-tooled holster that had been Thorne's parting gift. He could draw and fire in less than half a second, put 6 shots through a silver dollar at 20 paces, reload while moving and never break stride. He was ready. "You're sure about this?" Thorne asked, watching from the doorway. The old man had aged noticeably in the 15 years since he'd taken in a desperate boy. His hair had gone completely white. His hands showed the first tremors of palsy, but his eyes were still sharp, still seeing everything. "I'm sure. You know there's no coming back from this. You go down this road, it ends one of 2 ways, them dead or you dead. There's no middle ground, no happy ending." "I know." Thorne nodded slowly. "Then I guess there's nothing left to say except, don't hesitate. Men who hesitate die. You taught that boy well enough." "What boy?" The old man smiled faintly. "Exactly. That boy died a long time ago. The man standing here is someone else entirely. Someone harder, someone dangerous," he paused. "Someone I'm proud to have trained." Ethan felt something tighten in his chest, an emotion he'd thought long dead trying to surface. He crushed it ruthlessly. Emotions were weakness, and weakness got you killed. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything. Don't thank me, just survive. And when it's done, if you're still breathing, don't become them. That's the real challenge. Killing monsters is easy. Not becoming one is the hard part." Ethan didn't reply. He simply turned, collected his bedroll and saddlebags, and walked to where his horse waited. He'd bought the animal, a tough Mustang mare with good wind and better sense, with money Thorne had saved from his bounty hunting days. Everything else he owned he carried with him. Extra ammunition, dried food, a change of clothes, and the small leather pouch containing his mother's wedding ring recovered from the ruins of the homestead years ago. He swung into the saddle and looked back one last time at the old man standing in the cabin doorway. "Be careful," Thorne called out. "Careful keeps you alive. I'm not interested in staying alive." "Then what are you interested in?" "Justice." "Justice or revenge? Is there a difference?" Thorne shook his head sadly. "Go find out." The ride down from the mountains took 3 days. Ethan moved carefully, staying off main trails, camping without fires. He wasn't ready to be seen yet, not until he'd scouted the situation, understood how much had changed in 15 years, determined the best approach. On the evening of the 3rd day, he crested the ridge overlooking Black Ridge Valley and stopped. The valley had been transformed. Where once had stood scattered ranches and modest farms, there was now a sprawling town. Railroad tracks cut through the valley's heart, and newly built warehouses and loading stations clustered around them. The town of Black Ridge had tripled in size, spreading out from the original main street like a stain. New buildings, hotels, saloons, gambling halls, brothels, catered to the railroad workers and drovers who now flooded through on a regular basis. Money had come to the valley, just as Clayton Reeves had predicted, and the Reeves family had claimed their share. Their empire was visible from the ridge. The main ranch house, a sprawling mansion that dwarfed anything else in the valley, sat on a hill overlooking Black Ridge, as if the brothers wanted everyone to remember who ruled here. Smaller properties dotted their holdings, each marked with the distinctive Reeves brand. They owned land as far as Ethan could see, built on blood and theft and the broken backs of people too frightened to resist. Ethan felt the cold rage that had sustained him for 15 years surge through his veins, but he kept it controlled, channeled. Thorne's voice echoed in his memory. Smart beats fast. Patient beats strong. He made camp that night on the ridge, watching the lights of Black Ridge flicker below like distant stars. Tomorrow, he'd ride into town. Not as Ethan Vance. That name was dead and buried. He'd need a new identity, a plausible story, something that would let him move through Black Ridge without raising suspicions. He spent hours considering options, discarding them, refining his approach. By dawn, he had his story straight. His name was Cole Hartley, a drifter from Wyoming looking for work. He had experience with horses and cattle, could handle himself in a fight, and minded his own business. He'd come to Black Ridge because he'd heard there was money to be made and jobs for men who weren't afraid of hard work or gray moral areas. It was a common enough story in a boomtown. No one would question it too closely. And if they did? Well, Cole Hartley had a convincing answer to most questions, the cold steel of a .45 Colt. Ethan, no, Cole now, he had to think of himself that way, checked his weapons one final time, ran through his story until it felt natural, and rehearsed the persona he'd be presenting. Not too friendly, not too hostile. Competent, but not flashy. Someone you'd hire but not remember. The hard part would be keeping his hatred controlled when he finally saw them. When he stood in the same room as the men who'd murdered his family and gotten away with it, but he'd spent 15 years preparing for this. He could wait a little longer. The sun rose over the valley, painting the landscape in shades of gold and red, the colors of wealth and blood. Cole Hartley mounted his horse, adjusted his hat, and rode down toward Black Ridge. The boy who'd fled this place was gone. In his place rode something far more dangerous, a ghost made flesh, a reckoning dressed in trail dust and gun leather, a promise kept against impossible odds. The Reeves brothers had 15 years to enjoy their ill-gotten empire. Their time was up. Black Ridge had grown fat on other people's suffering, and it showed in every gaudy storefront and overpriced drink. Cole Hartley rode down Main Street at a deliberate pace, letting his eyes take in everything while his face remained impassive. The town pulsed with the chaotic energy of a place where money flowed fast and morals flowed faster. Miners fresh from the hills threw away their earnings in establishments that promised comfort and delivered exploitation. Railroad workers crowded saloons where watered-down whiskey cost twice what it should. Merchants hawked goods at inflated prices to men too tired or too drunk to argue, and over it all hung the shadow of the Reeves empire. Their name was everywhere. Reeves Bank and Trust anchored the north end of Main Street, its brick facade projecting permanence and respectability. Reeves General Supply sat across from it, doing brisk business. The Black Ridge Hotel, the finest building in town, flew a discreet plaque identifying Clayton Reeves as principal owner. Even the sheriff's office, supposedly a public institution, bore the subtle marks of Reeves' influence in its well-maintained exterior and the quality horses tied outside. Cole noted it all with the cold assessment of a man planning a campaign. Know your enemy's territory, identify his strongholds, understand his resources. Thorne's lessons had covered more than just gunfighting. He guided his horse toward a livery stable at the edge of town, deliberately choosing one that didn't bear the Reeves name. It was a ramshackle affair, weathered boards, and a roof that had seen better days, but the horses in the corral looked well-fed, and the proprietor, an old Chinese man, watched his approach with sharp, intelligent eyes. "Need boarding," Cole said, dismounting. 2 weeks to start, maybe longer." The old man nodded, moving forward to examine the Mustang with practiced hands. He ran his fingers along her legs, checked her teeth, studied her conformation. "Good horse. You take care of her." "She takes care of me." $2 a week. Feed, water, rub down. Anything else costs extra. Cole handed over $4 silver. "Fair price. You got a name?" "Cheng. You?" "Hartley. Cole Hartley." Cheng took the money and gestured toward the corral. "Stall 3. You want your gear stored?" "I'll take what I need. The rest can stay with the horse." Cole unsaddled the Mustang, removed his saddlebags and bedroll, and gave the mare a final pat. Chang was already forking fresh hay into the stall, and Cole noticed the old man moved with the efficiency of someone who knew his business. That was good. The horse would be well cared for, and Chang didn't seem the type to ask questions or volunteer information. With his few possessions slung over his shoulder, Cole walked back toward the heart of Black Ridge. He needed 3 things: a place to sleep, a source of income, and eyes on the Reeves brothers. The first 2 were straightforward. The third would require patience and careful positioning. The boarding house he chose was 2 blocks off Main Street, a nondescript building that catered to workers and drifters. The woman who ran it, Mrs. Cassidy, heavy-set and no-nonsense, looked him over with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen every type of man the frontier produced. $7 a week, she said flatly, meals included. No drinking in the rooms, no women, no fighting. You cause trouble, you leave. Clear? Clear. I'll take a month. Her eyebrows rose slightly as Cole counted out $28. It was a significant sum, more than most drifters carried, but not so much that it would draw dangerous attention. Mrs. Cassidy pocketed the money and handed him a key. Room 6, 2nd floor. Breakfast at dawn, dinner at dusk. You're late? You don't eat? Outhouse is out back, washroom at the end of the hall. Anything else? Where's a man find work around here? What kind of work you looking for? The kind that pays. I can handle horses, cattle, freight. I'm not particular. Mrs. Cassidy studied him more carefully now, taking in the gun belt worn low and tied down, the calloused hands, the eyes that didn't quite match the casual tone. You looking for honest work or the other kind? Like I said, I'm not particular. She nodded slowly, as if confirming something she'd suspected. Honest work, try the railroad yards or the freight companies. Other kind, she paused. Reeves' family is always hiring. They pay well and they don't ask many questions. Where would I find them? Main office is in the bank building. Ask for Mr. Dalton. He handles hiring for their various enterprises. But be warned, mister, money's good, but the work can get rough. Reeves' family doesn't hire gentle men. Good thing I'm not gentle. Cole climbed the stairs to his room, a Spartan space with a bed, a washstand, and a small window overlooking the alley. He set his gear down and immediately checked the window's sightlines, the room's entry points, the structural weak spots. Old habits from years of training. Never enter a space without understanding how to defend it or flee from it. Satisfied with the room's basic security, he cleaned up as best he could, changed into his spare shirt, and headed back out into Black Ridge's dusty streets. The sun was dropping toward the mountains now, painting everything in shades of amber and shadow. The town was coming alive for the evening. Saloons lighting their lamps, gaming tables being set up, the rougher element emerging like nocturnal predators. Cole made his way to Reeves Bank and Trust. The building was impressive by frontier standards. 2 stories of imported brick with actual glass windows and a wooden boardwalk out front. Inside, the furnishing spoke of money and permanence. Polished wood, brass fixtures, a teller's cage that looked substantial enough to stop a battering ram. A clerk in a pressed suit looked up as Cole entered. "Can I help you?" "Looking for Dalton. Heard he handles hiring." The clerk's eyes flicked to Cole's gun, then back to his face. "Mr. Dalton's office is upstairs, second door on the left." Cole climbed the stairs, his boots echoing on polished wood that seemed obscene in a place built on theft and murder. At the top, he found a hallway with several doors, all closed. He knocked on the second left. "Come." The office was smaller than Cole expected, cluttered with papers and ledgers. Behind the desk sat a man in his 40s, balding and thin, with ink-stained fingers and the hunched posture of someone who spent his life with numbers. His eyes, though, were sharp and calculating. "You're Dalton?" "I am. And you are?" "Cole Hartley, looking for work." Dalton leaned back in his chair, studying Cole with the same assessing gaze Mrs. Cassidy had used, but colder, more predatory. "What kind of work?" "Whatever pays. I'm told the Reeves family has opportunities." "We do, but we're selective about who we employ. What's your background, Mr. Hartley?" Cole had rehearsed this conversation 100 times in his mind during the ride down from the mountains. The key was to give enough detail to seem legitimate without providing anything that could be verified. "Spent the last few years in Wyoming and Montana, ranch work mostly, some freight hauling. Had a disagreement with a foreman in Cheyenne that got physical. Seemed like a good time to relocate." "This disagreement, did it involve the law?" "Briefly." Nothing that stuck. Dalton nodded, as if this was exactly the answer he'd expected. "Can you handle yourself in difficult situations?" "I'm still breathing, aren't I?" "Can you follow orders without asking unnecessary questions?" "Depends on the orders." "Wrong answer, Mr. Hartley. In Reeves Enterprises, you follow orders. Period. You have a problem with that. There's the door." Cole let a beat of silence pass, as if considering, then shrugged. "I can follow orders, as long as the pay matches the risk." "It does. $3 a day plus room and board, more for specialized work." $3 a day was excellent wages for common labor, enough to make men overlook a lot of moral ambiguity. Cole pretended to think it over, then nodded. "What's the work?" "Security, primarily. The Reeves family has extensive holdings throughout the valley. Ranches, freight operations, mining claims. All of it needs protection from thieves, squatters, and competitors. You'd be part of a crew that ensures nothing disrupts our business interests. Translation: hired muscle to intimidate, threaten, and if necessary, eliminate anyone who stood in the Reeves family's way." Exactly what Cole had expected. "When do I start?" "Tomorrow morning. There's a bunkhouse at the main ranch, 5 miles north of town. Report there at dawn. Ask for Jack Thornton, the crew boss. He'll assign you duties." Dalton made a note in his ledger. "One more thing, Mr. Hartley. The Reeves family values loyalty above all else. Men who prove reliable rise quickly in our organization. Men who disappoint us." He let the sentence hang meaningfully. "Well, let's just say turnover can be high." "Understood." Cole descended the stairs and stepped back into Blackridge's dusty evening, feeling a cold satisfaction settle in his chest. In one day, he'd managed to position himself inside the Reeves organization. He'd have access to their operations, their people, their vulnerabilities. More importantly, he'd be close to the brothers themselves. But he couldn't afford to move too quickly. Patience, Thorne had drilled into him. Study your prey. Understand their patterns. Wait for the perfect moment. He spent the rest of the evening walking Blackridge's streets, mapping the town's layout in his mind. The sheriff's office, Sheriff Warren, according to the sign. Though Cole would bet his horse the man was in Clayton Reeves's pocket. The telegraph office, the assay office, the various saloons and gambling halls. He noted which establishments looked Reeves-owned and which were independent, where the workers congregated and where the moneymen held court. As night fell, he found himself standing across the street from the largest saloon in town, the Silver Dollar, naturally owned by the Reeves family. Through the windows, he could see the place was packed with miners and railroad men throwing away their wages on overpriced drinks and rigged card games. The noise spilled into the street, a cacophony of laughter and curses and badly played piano. Cole was about to turn away when movement caught his eye. A man emerged from the Silver Dollar's front entrance, and even 15 years couldn't erase Cole's recognition of that walk, that bearing. Marcus Reeves. The youngest brother looked older, of course, early 30s now, his face carrying the bloat and broken veins of a man who drank too much. But he still wore his guns low and tied down, still carried himself with the arrogant swagger of someone who'd never faced consequences for his actions. Cole's hand drifted toward his Colt, muscle memory taking over. One shot, right now, and Marcus Reeves would die in the street where he belonged. But Thorne's voice cut through the rage. Smart beats fast, patient beats strong. One brother dead would put the others on guard. They'd hire more protection, increase security, possibly leave the territory until the threat was neutralized. Cole would get his revenge, but incompletely. The others might escape justice entirely. No, he'd waited 15 years. He could wait a little longer. Marcus climbed onto a horse and rode off into the night, probably heading back to the main ranch. Cole watched him disappear, then forced himself to turn away and walk back to the boarding house. In his room, he lay on the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, replaying the evening's events. Everything was proceeding according to plan. He'd established his cover, secured employment, and already laid eyes on one of his targets. Tomorrow, he'd infiltrate the ranch, begin learning routines and vulnerabilities, start positioning himself for the moment when he could strike with maximum effectiveness. But sleep was a long time coming. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Marcus Reeves pulling the trigger, saw his mother spinning and falling, saw his father's head snapping back. The memories were as fresh as the day they'd happened, preserved in perfect detail by 15 years of focused hatred. Soon, he promised the ghosts. Soon you'll have your justice. The dawn came cold and clear, and Cole was already dressed and armed when the first light touched Black Ridge's dusty streets. He ate a quick breakfast at Mrs. Cassidy's boarding house, biscuits and gravy that tasted like paste, then collected his horse from Chang's livery and rode north toward the Reeves Ranch. The main compound sat on a rise overlooking the valley, a sprawling collection of buildings that spoke to the family's wealth and power. The main house was a two-story mansion that would have looked at home in San Francisco, complete with a wraparound porch and actual painted shutters. Surrounding it were barns, corrals, bunkhouses, storage sheds, and various outbuildings. At least 24 horses grazed in nearby pastures, and Cole counted 8 armed men moving around the property on various tasks. A fortress disguised as a ranch. Cole rode up the main approach, keeping his hands visible and his posture relaxed. 2 men with rifles watched him from the porch, their eyes tracking his every movement. One of them called out as he drew near. "State your business." "Name's Cole Hartley. Dalton sent me. Looking for Jack Thornton." The guards exchanged glances. Then one jerked his thumb toward a large bunkhouse on the east side of the compound. "Over there. Knock before you enter unless you want your head blown off." Cole dismounted and walked to the bunkhouse, aware of the rifles still trained on his back. He knocked twice on the door and waited. "It's open." Inside, the bunkhouse was surprisingly well appointed. Actual bunks with mattresses instead of straw, a wood stove, even a few chairs and a table for cards. 5 men were present, all of them armed, all of them watching Cole with the wary assessment of professional violence workers sizing up new competition. The man who'd spoken sat at the table, a deck of cards spread in front of him in a game of solitaire. He was built like a bull, thick neck, sloping shoulders, hands that looked capable of breaking bones without effort. A scar ran from his left eyebrow to his jaw, giving his face a perpetual sneer. "You're Hartley?" "I am." "You're Thornton?" "Jack Thornton, yeah." "Dalton says you're looking for work." "That's right." Thornton stood, and Cole noted the man topped 6 feet and probably weighed close to 250. "You any good with that pistol, or is it just for show?" "It's not for show." "Prove it." Thornton gestured toward the door, and the group filed outside to a makeshift shooting range behind the bunkhouse. Someone had set up a row of bottles on fence posts about 20 yards distant. Thornton pointed at them. "Let's see what you got." Cole walked to the firing line, aware that this was a test not just of his marksmanship, but of his nerves. He could feel the eyes on him, the skepticism, the barely concealed hostility. These men made their living through intimidation and violence, and they didn't take kindly to outsiders who might threaten their positions. He drew and fired 6 times in rapid succession. 6 bottles exploded into glittering fragments. The silence that followed was gratifying. Cole reloaded without hurry, his hands steady, his face showing nothing. When he looked up, Thornton was studying him with new interest. Where'd you learn to shoot like that? Wyoming. Man taught me before he died. What was his name? Cole had anticipated this question. Called himself Smith. Probably wasn't his real name, didn't ask too many questions. Thornton nodded slowly, accepting the lie because it fit the frontier's code of not prying into a man's past. All right, Hartley, you can handle a gun. Question is, can you handle the work? What's the work? We're heading out to the Western properties tomorrow. There's a family of squatters who've set up on Reeves land, claiming some old Mexican grant gives them title. Mr. Clayton wants them gone. Cole kept his face neutral despite the cold rage building in his chest. The same tactic the Reeves brothers had used on his family. Claim the land, remove the obstacles, erase the evidence. Gone how? However necessary. Preferably they leave on their own, scared enough to never come back. If they're stubborn, Thornton shrugged. Then we make an example. Can you handle that? This was the moment. Say yes. And Cole would become complicit in exactly the kind of violence that had destroyed his family. Say no, and he'd blow his cover before he'd learned anything useful. He thought of his mother's face as the bullet took her, his father's last stand against impossible odds, the 15 years of training and suffering and single-minded purpose. I can handle it, he said flatly. Thornton studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Good. We ride out at dawn. In the meantime, you're assigned to night watch. 2-hour shifts, rotating with the others. Any questions? Pay? $3 a day like Dalton told you. Paid weekly. In silver. You try to steal from the family, you disappear. You cross Mr. Clayton, or his brothers, you disappear. You talk about family business outside the organization, you disappear. We clear? Crystal. Then go stow your gear, your bunk is number 7. Welcome to the Reeves outfit, Hartley. Cole spent the rest of the day settling in and observing. The bunkhouse held 12 men total, a mix of experienced gun hands and young toughs looking to prove themselves. Most had the dead-eyed look of men who'd crossed moral lines so many times they no longer saw them. They accepted Cole with the casual indifference of professionals who'd seen dozens of men cycle through the organization. He learned quickly that the operation was more sophisticated than he'd expected. The Reeves brothers ran multiple crews, each handling different aspects of their empire. Thornton's crew focused on land acquisition and security. Another crew, run by a man named Sykes, handled the more profitable illegal operations: rustling, claim jumping, intimidation of competing businesses. A third crew, smaller and more secretive, reported directly to William Reeves and handled problems that required permanent solutions. Cole also learned that the brothers rarely appeared at the ranch simultaneously. Clayton spent most of his time in town, managing the legitimate businesses and cultivating his political connections. William moved between various properties, troubleshooting problems and ensuring operations ran smoothly. Marcus drifted, gambling and drinking and occasionally handling enforcement work when he was sober enough. The division of labor revealed potential vulnerabilities. The brothers' separation meant they couldn't immediately support each other if threatened. Their different personalities meant they might react differently to pressure. Marcus's drinking made him unpredictable and potentially easier to manipulate. Clayton's political ambitions meant he cared about public perception. William's efficiency made him dangerous but also predictable. Cole filed away every detail, every scrap of information, building a complete picture of his enemy's strengths and weaknesses. That night during his watch shift, he stood outside the bunkhouse and stared up at the main house. Lights glowed in several windows. He wondered if any of the brothers were inside, sleeping peacefully, secure in their stolen wealth and unpunished crimes. Somewhere in that house might be the very room where they'd planned his family's murder, where they'd decided that the Vance ranch was worth more than the Vance lives, where they'd laughed about it afterward, toasting their success with expensive whiskey purchased with blood money. Cole's hand rested on his Colt, and for a moment the temptation was overwhelming. Storm the house right now, kill everyone inside, burn it to the ground. But that wasn't the plan. That was rage talking, not strategy. Thorne's voice. The man who controls his emotions controls the situation. Cole forced himself to breathe slowly, to channel the hatred into focus rather than recklessness. He had time. He had position. He had skills they didn't know about. All he needed now was patience. The next morning, Thornton's crew rode out toward the western properties. There were 8 of them, all armed, all carrying themselves with the casual menace of men accustomed to getting their way through intimidation. Cole rode near the back, observing, learning the crew's dynamics. Thornton led from the front, his authority unquestioned. Beside him rode a weasel-faced man named Pike, who served as Thornton's second. The others fell into a loose hierarchy based on experience and violence capability. Cole noted who deferred to whom, who watched whose back, who might be weak links if things turned violent. They rode for 3 hours, following fence lines and property markers that bore the Reeves brand. The land was good. Rich grass, clean water, protected from the worst winds. Prime ranching country that someone had worked hard to develop. Someone the Reeves brothers now claimed to own. The squatter family's homestead appeared around midday, a modest operation that reminded Cole painfully of his own family's spread. A small house, a barn, corrals with a few horses and cattle. Laundry hung on a line, moving gently in the breeze. Smoke rose from the chimney. A family lived here, worked here, called it home. Thornton raised his hand and the crew stopped 100 yards from the house. Hartley, Pike, you're with me. The rest of you spread out, cover the exits. Anyone runs, shoot to wound, not kill. Mr. Clayton wants them scared, not martyred. Cole dismounted and followed Thornton and Pike toward the house. His mind was racing, calculating angles and possibilities. He couldn't let this family suffer the same fate as his own, but he also couldn't blow his cover. Not yet. Not until he'd learned enough to take down all 3 brothers permanently. Before they reached the porch, the door opened. A man emerged, holding a shotgun but not pointing it. He was in his 40s, weathered and work-worn, with the cautious look of someone who'd dealt with trouble before. "That's far enough," he called out. "State your business." Thornton stopped but didn't dismount. "Name's Jack Thornton. I work for the Reeves family. You're on their land." "This is my land. Got papers proving it." "Your papers are worthless. This property belongs to the Reeves family, purchased legal and proper. You've got 24 hours to pack up and leave." "I'm not going anywhere. This land was granted to my wife's grandfather by the Mexican government before the territory changed hands. We've got a legitimate claim." "Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Doesn't matter. Mr. Clayton Reeves owns the deed recognized by the territorial government. That trumps your old Mexican grant. Now you can leave peaceful, or we can make this difficult. Your choice." The man's jaw tightened. "We've improved this land, built that house with our own hands, cleared the fields, dug the well. We've got nowhere else to go." "Not my problem." "I'm not leaving." Thornton sighed, as if genuinely disappointed. Then he nodded to Pike. "Burn the barn." "No!" The man raised his shotgun, but Cole was faster. He drew his Colt and fired, the bullet striking the shotgun's barrel and sending it spinning from the man's hands. The homesteader stumbled backward, shock and fear warring on his face. Pike was already moving toward the barn with a torch, grinning like this was the best entertainment he'd had all week. The homesteader scrambled for his shotgun, but Cole stepped forward and kicked it away. "Don't," he said quietly. "You pull that trigger, you're dead. Your family's dead. Is the land worth that?" The man's eyes were wild, desperate. "It's all we have." "Then you'll find something else. Because if you stay here, you'll have nothing, including your life." Behind them, flames were already licking up the barn's sides. Pike had done his work efficiently, and the dry wood caught fast. The homesteader's wife appeared in the doorway, screaming, pulling at her husband's arm. 2 children, a girl maybe 8 and a boy younger, clung to her skirts, crying. Just like Ethan had clung to his mother, Cole felt something crack inside him, but he kept his face stone. 24 hours, he repeated. After that, it's not just the barn that burns. Thornton wheeled his horse and rode away, satisfied with his work. The crew followed, leaving the family standing amid the smoke and destruction of their dreams. Cole was the last to leave. As he mounted his horse, he looked back at the homesteader. Their eyes met, and Cole saw in the man's face everything he'd felt 15 years ago: rage, helplessness, despair. He wanted to say something, to warn them, to help them somehow. But any word out of place would expose him, and he couldn't save this family if he was dead. So he turned his horse and followed the crew back toward the Reeves ranch, hating himself with every hoofbeat. That night, lying in his bunk while the others snored around him, Cole stared at the ceiling and wondered what he'd become. He'd spent 15 years preparing to destroy the Reeves brothers, but in the process, had he become just another one of their thugs? How many more families would suffer while he positioned himself for the perfect strike? Thorne had warned him, "Don't become them. That's the real challenge." Too late, old man, Cole thought bitterly. I already have. But then anger replaced the self-pity. No, he wasn't like them. The Reeves brothers destroyed for profit, for power, for the sheer joy of domination. Cole would destroy them for justice, for the families they'd ruined, for the blood they'd spilled. The difference mattered. It had to matter. 3 days later, Pike brought news that the squatter family had left during the night, abandoning everything they couldn't carry. Thornton was pleased. Mr. Clayton would be pleased. The Reeves empire had grown by another few hundred acres, and no one had died. Cole said nothing, but he added another name to the ledger he kept in his mind. Another crime. Another reason why the brothers had to pay. The weeks blurred together in a routine of violence and vigilance. Cole rode with Thornton's crew on various jobs, intimidating shopkeepers who were behind on protection payments, breaking up workers who tried to organize for better wages, removing squatters and homesteaders from land the Reeves family coveted. Each job added to his knowledge of the organization's operations and vulnerabilities. He also began to see the brothers in action. Clayton appeared at the ranch periodically, always impeccably dressed, always charming and reasonable in his speech, even as he ordered actions that would destroy lives. William was a ghost, appearing without warning to handle problems personally and then vanishing again. Marcus spent most of his time drinking and gambling in town, occasionally showing up at the ranch to make demands and throw his weight around. Cole studied them obsessively, learning their patterns, their weaknesses, the fault lines in their relationship. Clayton and William seemed to have genuine respect for each other, operating as a functional partnership. But both viewed Marcus with barely concealed contempt, tolerating him only because blood ties demanded it. That was exploitable. Cole also began to cultivate carefully selected relationships within the organization. He became friends with a young gun hand named Reese, who was skilled but naive, desperate to prove himself worthy of the Reeves family's trust. Through Reese, Cole learned details about the brothers' personal lives, their habits, their schedules, their vulnerabilities. He learned that Clayton's wife was deeply religious and increasingly uncomfortable with how her husband made his money. She'd started attending church more frequently, sometimes bringing her children along, seeking some kind of moral absolution for living on blood money. He learned that William had a weakness for a certain prostitute at the Silver Dollar Saloon, one of the few human connections in his otherwise cold existence. He visited her every Thursday night, staying until dawn. He learned that Marcus was deeply in debt from gambling, borrowing money from his brothers to cover losses, creating tension within the family structure. Each piece of information was a weapon. Each vulnerability was a potential pressure point. But Cole needed more than information. He needed the brothers isolated, exposed, vulnerable to direct action. And that required something they'd never experienced before: real fear. The opportunity came 2 months after Cole joined the organization. Thornton's crew was assigned to guard a shipment of mining equipment traveling from Black Ridge to one of the Reeves family's silver claims in the northern hills. It was routine work, the kind of job that required presence more than action. Bandits rarely hit Reeves shipments because everyone knew the family's reputation for brutal retaliation. But this time, someone did. The attack came at a narrow spot in the road where rocks pressed close on both sides. Rifle fire erupted from above, bullets ricocheting off stone and wagon bed. The driver was hit first, slumping in his seat. Then Pike took a round in the shoulder and fell from his horse screaming. Thornton roared orders, returning fire blindly. The crew scattered, seeking cover, their vaunted professionalism evaporating in seconds. Cole dove behind a boulder and assessed the situation with cold clarity. 3 shooters, maybe 4. They'd chosen their position well. High ground, good cover, clear fields of fire. Probably just opportunistic bandits who'd seen valuable cargo and decided to risk the Reeves family's wrath. They were about to regret that decision. Cole waited for a lull in the firing, then moved, not away from the danger, but toward it. He scrambled up the rocks with the agility of a man who'd spent years in the wilderness, his Colt drawn, his breathing steady despite the pounding of his heart. The first bandit never saw him coming. Cole emerged behind him and fired once, the bullet taking the man in the back of the head. He was moving before the body hit the ground, heading for the second position. This one saw him at the last second, tried to swing his rifle around, too slow. Cole shot him twice, center mass, and kept moving. The third and fourth bandits had heard the shots and were turning, trying to find this new threat. Cole dropped the third with a shot that caught him square in the chest. The fourth fired back, the bullet tugging at Cole's sleeve, but his return shot was perfect, right between the eyes. 4 men, dead in less than 30 seconds. Silence fell over the road. Cole holstered his Colt and made his way back down to where the crew was regrouping. Thornton stared at him with something between awe and suspicion. "What the hell was that?" "That was me earning my pay," Cole said flatly. "Is Pike going to live?" "Yeah, it's just a shoulder wound, but those bandits, you killed all 4 of them, by yourself." "They chose badly. The job's done. Let's get this shipment moving." Word of Cole's actions spread quickly through the Reeves organization. Within 2 days, everyone knew about the man who'd single-handedly killed 4 bandits and saved a valuable shipment. Mr. Clayton requested to meet him personally. Cole stood in Clayton Reeves' office in town, facing the man who'd ordered his parents murdered, and fought to keep his expression neutral. Clayton sat behind a massive oak desk, looking every inch the successful businessman in his tailored suit and polished shoes. He smiled warmly, as if they were old friends. "Mr. Hartley, I've heard impressive things about you." "Just doing my job, Mr. Reeves." "You did considerably more than that. Jack Thornton tells me you moved with skill he's rarely seen. Where exactly did you learn to handle yourself like that?" Cole stuck to his story. "Wyoming. Man named Smith taught me. Said I had a natural talent for it." Clayton studied him with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "I've been in this business a long time, Mr. Hartley. I can tell when a man is simply good with a gun and when he's been professionally trained. You fall into the latter category." The silence stretched. Cole held Clayton's gaze, knowing that flinching now would be fatal. Finally, Clayton smiled. "But I'm not complaining. In fact, I have a proposition for you. My brother William is looking for a personal bodyguard, someone skilled, discreet, and loyal. The pay is $5 a day plus bonuses. Interested?" $5 a day was extraordinary wages, and more importantly, it would give Cole direct access to one of the brothers. This was the breakthrough he'd been working toward. "I'm interested," he said carefully. "But I should mention, I'm not a blindly loyal man, Mr. Reeves. I follow orders if they make sense and if I'm paid well. If either of those things changes, so does my commitment." Clayton's smile grew wider. "I appreciate honesty, Mr. Hartley. And I understand pragmatism. You'll find that working directly for my family is highly profitable for those who prove themselves. You'll also find that disloyalty is expensive." "Understood." "Good. Report to William's office tomorrow morning. He'll brief you on your duties. Congratulations, Mr. Hartley. You've just been promoted." Cole left the office and walked out into Blackridge's dusty streets, his mind racing. He'd just secured personal access to William Reeves, arguably the most dangerous of the 3 brothers. It was a massive step forward in his plan. It was also extraordinarily dangerous. William was a professional, cold and calculating. He'd see through any mistake, any slip in Cole's cover. One wrong word, one suspicious action, and Cole would simply disappear, another body buried in an unmarked grave somewhere in the valley. But the risk was acceptable, because for the first time since returning to Blackridge, Cole could see a path to his revenge that ended with all 3 brothers dead and his parents finally avenged. The ghost had infiltrated the fortress. Now it was time to start haunting its halls. William Reeves' office occupied the 2nd floor of a nondescript building 2 blocks from the bank, deliberately unremarkable in a way that spoke volumes about the man's nature. No brass nameplate, no gilded sign, just a weathered door with a number painted in faded black. The kind of place people walked past without noticing, which was exactly the point. Cole climbed the stairs at dawn, his boots echoing in the empty hallway. He'd spent the night preparing mentally for this meeting, reviewing everything he knew about William, anticipating questions, hardening his resolve. This was the brother who'd shot his mother in the back, the enforcer, the one who made problems disappear. Standing outside that door, knowing what William had done, fighting the urge to kick it open and empty his Colt into the monster on the other side, that took every ounce of discipline Thorne had beaten into him over 15 years. He knocked twice and waited. "Enter." The office was sparse to the point of asceticism. A desk, 2 chairs, a filing cabinet, and nothing else. No personal effects, no decoration, no indication that a human being actually worked here. William Reeves sat behind the desk, reviewing papers with the methodical attention of an accountant rather than a killer. He looked up as Cole entered, and their eyes met. Cole felt ice slide down his spine. William's eyes were empty in a way that went beyond coldness. They were voids, windows into nothing. This was a man who'd killed so many times that death had become simply another transaction, no more meaningful than signing a contract or balancing a ledger. "Cole Hartley," William said, his voice flat and uninflected. "Sit." Cole sat, keeping his posture relaxed but ready, his hands visible but positioned where he could draw if necessary. William studied him for a long moment, and Cole had the unsettling sense of being dissected, analyzed, catalogued. "My brother tells me you killed 4 men in 30 seconds, give or take. Tell me how." Cole walked through the ambush, describing his tactical assessment and execution in clinical detail. William listened without interrupting, his face revealing nothing. When Cole finished, William leaned back in his chair. "You moved toward the threat instead of away from it. Why?" "Because that's where the solution was. Running just delays the problem. Most men's instincts tell them to seek cover, to survive. Your instinct is to attack. That's either exceptional training or you don't value your life much. Which is it?" The question was a trap, Cole realized. Answer wrong and William would see through the facade. He chose his words carefully. "I've got nothing to go back to. No family, no home, no place I belong. This life's all I have, and if I'm going to live it, I might as well be good at what I do." Something flickered in William's dead eyes. Not warmth, but perhaps recognition. "I understand that philosophy. Most men who work for my family are running from something or toward something. The ones who last are the ones who've made peace with violence as a permanent condition." "Sounds like you're describing yourself." "I am. And now I'm describing you, if the job I'm offering interests you. My brothers handle the public side of our operations. I handle everything else, the problems that need permanent solutions, the situations that can't be resolved through negotiation or intimidation, the threats that must be eliminated before they become dangerous. I need someone who can operate independently, follow complex instructions without question, and never speak about what they've seen or done. Can you be that person?" Cole met William's empty gaze and nodded. "For $5 a day plus bonuses, I can be whatever you need me to be." "The money is excellent, but so is the risk. Men who work closely with me tend to have short careers. Some are killed by our enemies. Some make mistakes and face consequences. A few prove exceptional and move up in the organization. Which category do you think you'll fall into?" "The last one." William's mouth curved in what might have been a smile on a normal human face, but looked like a predator baring teeth. "We'll see. Your first assignment begins today. There's a ranch in the Southern Valley owned by a family named Harrison. They've been making noise about organizing the smaller landholders to resist our expansion. Mr. Clayton tried buying them out. They refused. I offered them incentives to relocate. They refused. Now they're becoming a symbol for others who think they can stand against the Reeves family. That ends today." Cole's stomach tightened, but he kept his face neutral. "What do you need from me?" "I need you to accompany me to the Harrison Ranch. I'll handle the negotiation. You'll watch my back and observe how I work. Consider it your training day." "When do we leave?" 1 hour. Get your horse and meet me at the South Road staging post. And Hartley, bring enough ammunition. The Harrisons have 3 sons, all of them armed and all of them stupid enough to fight." Cole descended the stairs and walked through Blackridge's awakening streets with a sick feeling growing in his chest. Another family about to be destroyed by the Reeves brothers' insatiable appetite for land and power. Another group of people whose only crime was wanting to keep what was theirs. He could refuse the assignment, blow his cover, draw on William right now, and end at least one of the monsters. But that would leave Clayton and Marcus alive, and they'd vanish into their fortress of hired guns before Cole could reach them. 15 years of preparation wasted, his parents unavenged, the cycle of violence continuing unbroken. So he collected his horse from Chang's livery, checked his weapons, and rode to meet William Reeves, hating himself more with every hoofbeat. William was waiting at the staging post, mounted on a black gelding that matched his personality, cold, efficient, beautiful in a threatening way. He wore black from hat to boots, and his gun belt held 2 pistols instead of the usual one. Everything about him radiated lethal competence. They rode south without conversation, William setting a steady pace that ate up the miles. Cole used the silence to study his companion, looking for weaknesses, vulnerabilities, anything he could exploit when the moment came. But William rode like he did everything else, with complete focus and absolute control. No wasted movement, no nervous habits, no tells. After 2 hours, they reached the Harrison Ranch. It was a good property, well-maintained and prosperous. The house was solid timber with a stone chimney, the barn recently painted, the fences in excellent repair. Cattle grazed in the distance, fat and healthy. This was a family that worked hard and took pride in their land. William stopped 100 yards from the house and dismounted. Cole followed suit, his hand instinctively checking the Colt on his hip. The ranch appeared quiet, but Cole's trained senses detected movement behind the windows, the subtle positioning of people preparing for trouble. The Harrisons were expecting them. "Mr. Harrison!" William called out, his voice carrying across the yard without being raised. "I'm William Reeves. I believe you know why I'm here." The front door opened and a man emerged. He was in his 50s, weathered and strong, with the kind of face that suggested he'd faced down trouble before and survived. 3 younger men, clearly his sons, followed, all of them armed with rifles. They arranged themselves on the porch in a defensive line. "I know why you're here," Harrison called back. "And the answer's still no. This land is ours, earned and paid for. We're not selling and we're not leaving." William walked forward slowly, his hands visible and away from his guns. Cole trailed slightly behind and to the left, positioned where he could cover William, but also watch the sons. The middle son's hands were shaking on his rifle, his fear obvious. The youngest looked angry, eager even. The eldest simply looked tired, like a man who'd already accepted what was coming. "Mr. Harrison," William said, his tone almost conversational, "I admire your principles. Truly. But you're making a mistake. My family controls this valley. We control the water rights, the rail contracts, the markets where you sell your cattle. If we want to make your life difficult, we can. If we want to make it impossible, we can do that too. Why suffer when you could take our generous offer and start fresh somewhere else? Because this is our home. Our grandfather homesteaded this land 50 years ago. We've raised our children here, buried our dead here. You can't put a price on that. Everything has a price, Mr. Harrison. The question is whether you'll accept payment in cash or in suffering." Harrison's jaw tightened. "Are you threatening my family?" "I'm stating reality. You're one ranch. We're an empire. How do you think this ends? Maybe it ends with people finally standing up to you. Maybe it ends with enough families saying no that your empire starts to crumble." William's empty eyes studied Harrison for a moment, and Cole saw something shift in his posture, a predator deciding whether to toy with prey or simply kill it. "You think you're organizing resistance, that your little meetings with other ranchers will somehow build a coalition strong enough to challenge us. Let me save you some time, Mr. Harrison. We know about every meeting. We know everyone who attends. We know what you're planning, and it won't work. Do you know why?" "Why?" "Because courage is cheap until it costs something. Right now, you and a few others are angry enough to make noise. But the moment we start applying real pressure, foreclosing mortgages, cutting off water access, blacklisting you from markets, your coalition will evaporate. Men with families don't choose martyrdom when they can choose survival." "Then maybe you don't understand us as well as you think." William sighed, a sound of genuine disappointment. "Mr. Harrison, I had hoped to resolve this peacefully. My brother Clayton believes in providing opportunities for reasonable people to make reasonable decisions, but you're not being reasonable. So now we move to consequences." He turned slightly toward Cole. "Hartley, shoot the oldest son." Time seemed to fracture. Cole's hand moved toward his gun on pure instinct, but his mind was screaming contradictions. This wasn't the plan. This wasn't supposed to happen yet. He couldn't murder an innocent man, but if he refused, William would know something was wrong, and everything would collapse. The eldest Harrison son was raising his rifle, his face set with the grim determination of a man who knew he was about to die, but wouldn't go quietly. His father was shouting something. His brothers were moving, bringing their weapons to bear. Cole drew and fired in one smooth motion. The bullet struck the porch post 6 inches from the eldest son's head. exploding wood splinters across his face. Everyone froze. "I missed," Cole said flatly, his Colt still trained on the sun. "Won't happen twice." William turned to look at him, and in those dead eyes, Cole saw calculation rather than anger. A test, he realized. William had never intended for him to actually kill the son. He'd been testing Cole's willingness to follow orders, his speed, his nerve. "Interesting," William said. Then he drew his own pistol and shot Harrison's middle son through the chest. The young man dropped his rifle and staggered backward, clutching at the red stain spreading across his shirt. He fell to his knees, made a choked sound, and collapsed forward. His father screamed and lunged toward him, but William's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Stop! Move another inch and I kill your other sons!" Harrison froze, his hands stretched toward his dying son, his face twisted with anguish and rage. The youngest son was crying, his rifle forgotten. The eldest held his weapon but didn't fire, understanding that pulling that trigger meant death for everyone. William holstered his gun calmly. "You have 24 hours to vacate this property. If you're still here tomorrow, I'll return and finish what I started. Do you understand me, mister?" "Harrison?" Harrison's voice was broken, barely a whisper. "You killed my boy." "I killed one of them. Whether I kill the rest is up to you. 24 hours. Don't make me come back." William turned and walked back to his horse with the same measured pace he'd used approaching. Cole stood rooted for a moment, staring at the scene on the porch, the father cradling his dying son, the brothers frozen in shock and grief, the mother who'd appeared in the doorway and was now screaming. It was his family all over again. The same senseless violence, the same casual cruelty, the same message that human lives meant nothing against the Reeves family's ambitions. "Hartley," William called without looking back. "We're leaving." Cole forced himself to move, to turn away from the horror, to mount his horse and follow William Reeves back toward Blackridge. They rode in silence for a mile before William finally spoke. "You missed deliberately." It wasn't a question. Cole considered lying, decided against it. "I did." "Why?" "Because you didn't actually want him dead. You wanted to make a point about obedience and consequences, but you wanted the Harrisons to spread the story about what happens to families who resist. Dead men don't talk. Traumatized ones do." William studied him with something that might have been approval. "You think tactically. That's good. Most of the men who work for me are hammers. They see every problem as a nail. You're more surgical. I can use that. But understand something, Hartley. When I give you an order to kill, I expect you to kill. No hesitation, no interpretation, no independent decision-making. Clear?" "Clear." "Good. Because the Harrison job isn't finished. They won't leave peacefully. In 48 hours, we're going back to burn them out. And next time, if I tell you to shoot someone, you shoot them. No warnings, no missed shots, no mercy. That's the price of working for me." Cole rode the rest of the way to Blackridge with William's words echoing in his mind. In 48 hours, he'd face a choice that would define everything: follow orders and become exactly what he'd sworn to destroy, or break cover and try to take down William without being able to reach Clayton and Marcus. Unless he found another option. A way to protect the Harrisons, maintain his cover, and continue working toward his ultimate goal of destroying all three brothers. The answer came to him as they reached Blackridge's outskirts. It was risky, maybe suicidal, but it was the only path he could see that didn't involve becoming a monster or failing his mission. That night, after William dismissed him with instructions to rest before the next operation, Cole waited until full dark and then slipped out of the boarding house. He moved through Blackridge's shadows like the ghost Thorne had trained him to be, avoiding the main streets, sticking to alleys and back ways. He made his way to the telegraph office. The operator was closing up, counting his receipts by lamplight. Cole knocked on the door, and when the man looked up, he pressed 5 silver dollars against the glass. The operator's eyes widened, and he unlocked the door. "Need to send a wire," Cole said, "and I need it done with no record of who sent it." "That's irregular." "Company policy." Cole added $5 more to the stack. "Company policy seems flexible." The operator took the money and pulled out his pad. "What's the message?" "Send it to the U.S. Marshal's office in Carson City. Message reads, Reeves family planning violence against Harrison Ranch, southern Blackridge Valley. Multiple witnesses to murder. Armed response advised. Sign it, a concerned citizen. The operator wrote it down, then looked up nervously. Mister, if this is about the Reeves family, I could lose more than my job for sending this. Cole added another $5. That's for your discretion and your courage. Marshall's office won't get here for at least 3 days, maybe more. That's fine. Just send it. Cole left the telegraph office and made his way back to the boarding house, his mind already working through the implications. The telegram would bring federal law to Black Ridge, but not in time to prevent William's planned attack on the Harrisons. That meant Cole needed to find a way to delay or prevent that attack without revealing his hand. The solution came to him the next morning when Reese, the young gun hand, mentioned that Marcus Reeves had lost badly at cards the previous night and was in a foul mood, taking it out on anyone within shouting distance. Marcus's gambling addiction and hot temper were well known throughout the organization, a constant source of tension between him and his brothers. Cole found Marcus in the Silver Dollar Saloon, 3 drinks deep, and losing at poker to a group of railroad workers who didn't realize how dangerous their good fortune was. Marcus's face was flushed, his movements sloppy, his temper simmering just below the surface. Cole approached the table carefully, aware that drunk and angry Marcus was unpredictable even by his usual standards. Mr. Reeves, could I have a word? Marcus looked up, his eyes struggling to focus. Who the hell are you? Cole Hartley. I work for your brother William. He sent me to find you. William can go to hell. I'm busy losing money. He needs you at the office. Says it's urgent. Everything's urgent with William. Tell him to handle it himself. Cole lowered his voice, pitching it so only Marcus could hear. He's planning a major operation tomorrow. Says he needs your approval since it's family business. But if you're too busy here, I'll tell him you declined. Marcus's face darkened. Family business requiring his approval was unusual. William rarely consulted with him about operations. But the suggestion that he was declining participation, that he was choosing cards over family obligations, struck directly at his pride. He threw his cards down and stood, swaying slightly. Take me to him. Cole led Marcus through Black Ridge's streets toward William's office, walking slowly to give Marcus time to build up righteous anger about being summoned. By the time they climbed the stairs, Marcus was ready for confrontation. He burst through William's door without knocking. What's so damn important you had to interrupt my game? William looked up from his papers, his face showing nothing but Cole could sense the displeasure radiating from him like heat from a stove. I didn't send for you. Your man here said you needed me for family business. William's dead eyes shifted to Cole, who stood in the doorway with an expression of confused innocence. I apologize, Mr. Reeves. I thought, that is, Mr. Marcus said you'd sent for him earlier, and I assumed it was about tomorrow's operation. My mistake. There is no tomorrow operation, William said coldly. Not that it involves Marcus. The hell there isn't, Marcus shot back, his anger now fully ignited. You're always running operations without telling me, making decisions like I don't have a stake in this family. I'm tired of being treated like some useless drunk while you and Clayton run everything. If you stopped being a useless drunk, perhaps you'd be included in operations that require competence and discretion. Marcus's hand dropped toward his gun, and for a moment Cole thought he might actually draw on his own brother. William didn't move, but something in his posture suggested he was ready, even eager, for Marcus to try. You think you're so much better than me, Marcus hissed. So much smarter, so much more capable, but you're nothing but Clayton's attack dog. You do what he says, kill who he tells you to kill, and you don't even get the credit. At least I'm my own man. You're a liability, William said flatly. You always have been. The only reason you're still part of this family's operations is because Clayton has some misguided loyalty to blood. But don't mistake tolerance for respect, Marcus. You've earned none of mine. Marcus lunged across the desk, grabbing for William's throat. Cole stepped forward as if to intervene, but William moved with shocking speed, catching Marcus's wrist and twisting hard enough that something cracked. Marcus screamed and fell back, clutching his injured hand. Get out, William said, his voice still flat and emotionless despite having just broken his brother's wrist. And stay out of my way. You're no longer welcome in my operations. Marcus scrambled to his feet, his face twisted with pain and humiliation. He pushed past Cole and fled down the stairs. William watched him go, then turned his attention to Cole. You delivered a message that didn't exist. I made a mistake, sir. Won't happen again. No, you didn't make a mistake. You deliberately brought Marcus here to create conflict. The question is why? Cole met William's dead eyes without flinching, knowing his life hung on the next few seconds. Because Marcus is a problem. He's unstable, indiscreet, and his gambling debts make him vulnerable to pressure. Sooner or later, he's going to compromise an operation or force you to clean up his mess. I thought if you two had it out now, you might decide to cut him loose before he becomes a real liability. But I overstepped. I apologize. William studied him for a long moment, and Cole couldn't read anything in that empty gaze. Finally, William nodded slowly. You're right. Marcus is a problem. But he's also family, which makes him Clayton's problem to solve, not mine. However, I appreciate your tactical thinking. The ability to identify weak points and exploit them is valuable. Thank you, sir. The Harrison operation is postponed 48 hours. Marcus's injury requires attention, and Clayton wants to know what provoked the fight. In the meantime, I have another job for you. There's a cattle buyer in town asking questions about irregularities in the Reeves family's sales. I need you to discourage his curiosity. Think you can handle that without starting a family war? Yes, sir. Cole left William's office with a grim satisfaction. The confrontation between Marcus and William had bought the Harrison family more time, maybe enough for the marshal to arrive, maybe enough for them to flee. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was better than standing by while another family was destroyed. He spent the next 2 days handling William's various assignments, intimidating the cattle buyer into leaving town, dealing with a dispute between two of the Reeves family's properties, standing watch while William conducted private meetings that Cole wasn't allowed to observe. Each task revealed more about how the organization functioned, where its vulnerabilities lay, how the brothers' relationships were fraying under the pressure of managing their criminal empire. Cole also noticed that his growing reputation within the organization was attracting attention. Other men watched him with mixture of respect and wariness. Thornton treated him differently now, with more deference. Even Clayton had nodded to him on the street, a small gesture that nevertheless marked Cole as someone worth acknowledging. He was becoming exactly what he'd pretended to be, a valuable, dangerous asset to the Reeves family. The irony burned like acid. On the evening of the third day, Cole was cleaning his weapons in the bunkhouse when Reese burst through the door, breathless and excited. Marshal's here. Federal marshal from Carson City, with 6 deputies. They rode into town an hour ago asking questions about the Reeves family and the Harrison ranch. Cole kept his expression neutral, but inside he felt a surge of savage satisfaction. The telegram had worked. Federal law had arrived in Blackridge, and even the Reeves brothers couldn't simply make a U.S. Marshal disappear. What are they asking about? The shooting at the Harrison place. Apparently someone sent them a telegram claiming William murdered one of the sons. Marshal wants to question him. Where's William now? At the main ranch with Clayton. They're deciding how to handle it. Word is they're calling in all the crew. They want a show of force when the marshal comes asking his questions. Cole stood and buckled on his gun belt. Then, I'd better get to the ranch. The ride to the Reeves compound took him 20 minutes, and when he arrived, he found the place transformed into an armed camp. At least 30 men occupied the grounds, all of them armed, all of them watching the approach road with predatory interest. This was the Reeves family showing its strength, daring the law to challenge their authority. William stood on the main house porch with Clayton and Marcus, the 3 brothers united for the first time since Cole had arrived in Blackridge. Clayton looked calm and confident, every inch the legitimate businessman prepared to deal with an unfortunate misunderstanding. William was his usual expressionless self. Marcus, his wrist wrapped in bandages, glowered at the world with barely contained rage. Cole joined the crowd of hired guns in the yard, positioning himself where he could observe but not be conspicuous. He found Thornton and asked quietly, "What's the plan?" "We present overwhelming force. Make it clear that any attempt to arrest Mr. William would result in bloodshed the marshal can't afford. He'll ask his questions, we'll provide answers, and he'll leave with nothing." Standard procedure. What if he doesn't leave? Thornton's scarred face twisted into something approximating a smile. Then we'll have a problem. But marshals aren't stupid. He'll see the situation, recognize the reality, and find a way to close the case without starting a war. That's how it always works. But as the sun set and the marshal's party finally appeared on the horizon, Cole wondered if that would be true this time. Because the federal presence in Black Ridge wasn't just about the Harrison shooting anymore. It was about whether the Reeves family truly was above the law, whether their empire could withstand real scrutiny, whether the cycle of violence that had defined this valley for so long could finally be broken. The marshal rode at the head of his column, a weathered man in his 50s with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much frontier justice to be easily intimidated. His deputies spread out as they entered the compound, their rifles held ready but not aimed. The marshal himself rode directly to the main house and stopped, surveying the assembled force without visible concern. "I'm U.S. Marshal Henry Colton. I need to speak with William Reeves regarding a reported murder at the Harrison Ranch." Clayton stepped forward, his most charming smile in place. "Marshal Colton, welcome to our home. I'm Clayton Reeves. This is my brother William. I'm sure we can clear up whatever misunderstanding has brought you all this way." "This is no misunderstanding, Mr. Reeves. I have a sworn statement from Abraham Harrison claiming your brother shot and killed his son in cold blood. That's murder, and I intend to investigate it thoroughly." The situation was more complex than Mr. Harrison's grief might allow him to remember, Clayton said smoothly. William was conducting legitimate business, attempting to purchase property, when the Harrison sons threatened him with weapons. William acted in self-defense. That's not how Harrison tells it. With respect, Marshal, Mr. Harrison is understandably emotional about his son's death, but surely you understand that in such situations, memories can be unreliable. Fortunately, there was a witness, my employee Cole Hartley. Perhaps he can provide a more objective account. Every eye in the compound turned toward Cole. He felt the weight of their attention, felt the trap closing around him. Clayton had just designated him as the alibi witness, the man whose testimony would either corroborate William's self-defense claim or contradict it. If Cole told the truth, that William had murdered an unarmed man in cold blood, he'd blow his cover completely. The Reeves brothers would realize they'd harbored a viper, and Cole would likely die right here in this compound, overwhelmed by 30 armed men before he could draw his weapon. But if he lied, if he gave William an alibi, he'd be complicit in covering up murder. He'd cross a line that even revenge couldn't justify. Marshal Colton rode toward him, his sharp eyes taking in Cole's gun belt, his stance, his face. "You're Cole Hartley?" "I am." "And you witnessed the shooting at the Harrison Ranch?" "I did." "Tell me what happened. And before you do, understand that lying to a federal marshal carries serious consequences." Cole looked at the marshal, then at William's empty eyes, then at Clayton's expectant smile. He thought about his parents, about 15 years of training and suffering, about the families the Reeves brothers had destroyed and would continue destroying if they weren't stopped. He thought about the choice that would define him forever. Would he sacrifice his mission to tell the truth, or sacrifice the truth to serve his mission? And in that moment, he realized there was a third option, one that Thorne had taught him, but he'd forgotten in his single-minded pursuit of revenge. Sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't a gun or a lie, but a truth that destroys from within. Harrison's son was armed, Cole said clearly, letting his voice carry across the compound. He was holding a rifle when Mr. Williams shot him. That part's true. He saw Clayton relax slightly, saw Williams' posture remain unchanged, but the boy never pointed it at anyone. He was holding it down at his side, no threat to anybody. And Mr. Williams shot him anyway, shot him down like a dog, then threatened to kill the rest of the family if they didn't leave their land. Called it making a point about resistance. The compound went silent. Clayton's smile froze on his face. William's dead eyes bored into Cole with an intensity that promised death. The hired guns shifted nervously, suddenly aware they were standing at the center of something far larger than a simple investigation. Marshal Colton nodded slowly. "That's consistent with Harrison's account. Mr. William Reeves, I'm placing you under arrest for murder. You can come peacefully or—" "He's lying," Clayton said, his charm evaporating into cold fury. "Hartley is lying to serve some agenda of his own. William acted in self-defense, and I have 30 men here who'll testify to his character and the legitimacy of our business practices." "I'm sure you do," Colton said. "But I have a witness statement and a dead body. That's enough to require a trial. So we can do this easy, Mr. Reeves, or we can do it hard. Your choice." William's hand moved toward his gun, and suddenly everyone was drawing, 30 weapons clearing leather in a cascade of clicks and scrapes. The deputies brought their rifles to bear, outnumbered 5-1, but determined to do their duty. The compound transformed into a powder keg with 36 lit fuses. And Cole stood in the middle of it all, his Colt drawn and pointed at William Reeves' chest. His mask finally dropped, his true purpose revealed at last. "My name isn't Cole Hartley," he said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "It's Ethan Vance. 15 years ago, you three murdered my parents in cold blood and burned my home to ashes. You thought I died in the wilderness. You were wrong." Recognition dawned in Clayton's eyes, not of Cole's face, but of the name, of what it meant. William's expression didn't change, but his gun hand trembled slightly, the first sign of emotion Cole had ever seen from him. Marcus was the first to speak, his voice choked with shock. "The Vance boy? That's impossible. He was just a kid." "I was. Now I'm the man who's going to watch you all hang for what you did." "Stand down, everyone," Marshal Colton commanded. "Lower your weapons. This doesn't have to end in bloodshed." But no one moved. The hired guns looked to Clayton for orders. The deputies looked to Colton. And Cole kept his Colt trained on William, his finger resting on the trigger, 15 years of rage barely held in check. "Marshal," Clayton said carefully, "this man has just confessed to infiltrating our organization under false pretenses. He's clearly harbored a grudge against my family for years. His testimony is worthless. It's motivated by revenge, not truth." "Maybe," Colton said. "Or maybe it's both. Either way, the law will sort it out. But William Reeves is coming with me to stand trial, and anyone who tries to stop that will face federal charges. That includes you, Mr. Clayton Reeves." Clayton's face hardened into something ugly, the mask of civility finally slipping to reveal the monster beneath. "You're not taking my brother anywhere. You rode into this valley with 6 men and a piece of tin on your chest, thinking that gives you authority over us. It doesn't. We own this valley. The land, the law, everything. You're nothing here." "The law is something everywhere, Mr. Reeves. You do well to remember that. The law is what men with power say it is. And right now you're outnumbered, outgunned, and out of options." Colton's jaw tightened. "If you resist federal authority, I'll return with a full company of cavalry. They'll burn this compound to the ground and hang everyone involved. Is that really what you want?" For a long moment, no one moved. The sun had set fully now, and the compound was lit by torches that cast dancing shadows across faces twisted with anger, fear, determination. Cole kept his gun steady, knowing that if shooting started, he'd take William down first no matter what. Then William spoke, his voice as flat and empty as his eyes. "Enough." Everyone looked at him. "Marshal Colton is right. Fighting federal authority brings consequences we can't afford. I'll accompany him to stand trial. The truth will come out, and I'll be exonerated. Resisting will only make us look guilty." Clayton stared at his brother in disbelief. "William." "Trust me, Clayton. This is the smart play. Besides," William's empty eyes found Cole again, "I think Mr. Vance and I have unfinished business that's better settled in a courtroom than a gunfight. Don't you agree, Ethan?" Cole heard the threat beneath the words. William was confident he'd never stand trial, that something would happen between here and the courthouse to prevent justice. Maybe he'd escape. Maybe witnesses would disappear. Maybe the system that had failed the Vance family 15 years ago would fail them again. But at least William would be in custody, separated from his brothers, vulnerable in a way he'd never been before. "I agree," Cole said. "Let's let the law handle it." William holstered his gun slowly and stepped off the porch, walking toward Marshal Colton with his hands visible. The marshal produced iron shackles and locked them around William's wrists. Several deputies moved to flank the prisoner, their rifles ready. "We'll need a formal statement from you, Mr. Vance," Colton said to Cole. "You'll have to come with us." Cole nodded, aware that leaving the compound with the marshal's party would mark him as a traitor in the eyes of every man here. He'd never be able to return, never be able to use his cover again. But that didn't matter anymore. The mask had served its purpose. "One more thing," Cole said, looking directly at Clayton and Marcus. "The Harrison family has until tomorrow to leave their property. Anyone who tries to force them out or harm them in any way will answer to me personally. Am I clear?" Marcus lunged forward, rage overcoming caution. You son of a... Marcus, stop, Clayton commanded, his voice sharp. His eyes never left Cole's face, calculating, measuring. You've made your point, Mr. Vance. You've turned my brother over to federal custody and destroyed your own cover. Congratulations. But understand something, this isn't over. Not by a long shot. William may stand trial, but my family has resources you can't imagine. Money, influence, lawyers who can make witnesses forget what they saw. You think you've won because you told the truth? The truth is whatever we say it is. Then I guess we'll see whose version the jury believes. Cole mounted his horse and rode out of the Reeves compound with Marshal Colton's party, keeping William in his peripheral vision the entire time. Behind them, 30 armed men watched in silent rage, waiting for orders from Clayton that never came. The ride back to Blackridge took an hour, and they spent it in tense silence. William rode with his hands shackled, his face showing nothing, but Cole could feel his attention like a physical weight. The marshal positioned his deputies in a defensive formation, clearly expecting ambush at any moment. None came. Either Clayton had decided to let the legal process play out, or he was planning something more subtle. Either way, they reached Blackridge without incident and escorted William to the small stone building that served as the town jail. The sheriff, a paunchy man named Warren, who'd spent years in the Reeves family's pocket, met them at the door with barely concealed hostility. Marshal Colton, this is highly irregular. William Reeves is a respected citizen of this community. He's also accused of murder. Step aside, Sheriff. This is federal jurisdiction now. Warren didn't move. On whose authority? Mine. And unless you want to join him in a cell for obstruction, I suggest you open that door. Warren glanced at William as if looking for instructions. William gave a barely perceptible nod, and Warren stepped aside. They locked William in the single cell, posted guards, and established a watch rotation. Then Marshal Colton turned to Cole. You just made yourself the most hated man in Blackridge Valley. The Reeves family won't forgive what you've done. I'm not looking for forgiveness. What are you looking for? Justice. Justice and revenge aren't the same thing, son. Cole thought about Thorne's similar warning years ago. Sometimes they are. Sometimes they have to be. Colton sighed, looking suddenly very tired. Come on, we need to get your statement while it's fresh. Then I'm putting you in protective custody. The Reeves family has a long reach, and you're the only witness who can put William at the gallows. They spent the next 2 hours in a back room of the telegraph office, Cole providing a detailed statement about everything he'd witnessed. The Harrison shooting, the organization's operations, the brothers' roles in various crimes. Colton took notes in careful script, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When they finished, the marshal leaned back in his chair. You infiltrated a criminal organization, gathered intelligence, and exposed them at personal risk. That's brave work, Mr. Vance. But it's also dangerous as hell. These men have killed for less. I know. They killed my parents. About that, can you prove the Reeves brothers murdered your family? Any evidence beyond your word? Cole's jaw tightened. Everyone in this valley knows what happened, but no one will testify. They're too scared. Then we can't charge them for that crime, only for the one you witnessed. William will stand trial for murdering the Harrison boy. If convicted, he'll hang, but Clayton and Marcus walk free. Not for long. Mr. Vance, I can't condone vigilante justice. If you're planning, I'm not planning anything except making sure William stands trial and gets convicted. After that, Cole shrugged. We'll see what happens. Colton studied him with concern. You've waited 15 years for this. Don't throw away your chance at legitimate justice by doing something stupid. Marshal, with all respect, I stopped believing in legitimate justice when I watched my parents die and saw the killers right away laughing. This trial? It's not justice. It's the closest thing to it I'm ever going to get. I'll take what I can get. Before Colton could respond, gunfire erupted in the street. They burst from the telegraph office to find chaos in front of the jail. At least a dozen riders, Reeves men, Cole recognized several, had surrounded the building and were exchanging fire with the deputies guarding William. One deputy was already down, clutching his leg. The others had taken cover behind water troughs and posts, returning fire. Clayton Reeves sat his horse in the middle of the street, untouched by the bullets, watching with cold satisfaction as his men attempted to break his brother free. Cole drew his Colt and fired 3 times in rapid succession. 2 riders fell. The third shot took the hat off a man aiming at a deputy and sent him diving for cover. Marshal Colton added his own fire, and suddenly the tide shifted. The Reeves men had expected the deputies to be overwhelmed quickly. They hadn't counted on Cole's precision or Colton's experience. "Fall back!" Clayton shouted. His men retreated in disorder, dragging their wounded, leaving 2 dead in the street. Clayton himself wheeled his horse and fixed Cole with a look of pure hatred before riding away. The gun smoke cleared, revealing the full cost of the attempted jailbreak. 2 Reeves men dead, 3 wounded, 1 deputy injured. The jail's front wall was pockmarked with bullet holes, but William remained securely locked inside. Marshal Colton reloaded his pistol with shaking hands. "They just attacked federal officers in broad daylight. Clayton Reeves has lost his mind." "No," Cole said quietly. "He's desperate. He knows that if William testifies, if the truth comes out in court, their entire empire becomes vulnerable. He'll do whatever it takes to prevent that trial. Then we need to move William to Carson City tonight. Here, we can't protect him or you adequately, but in Carson City, with proper facilities and more men." Another shot rang out, this one from a different angle. Cole felt something tug at his shoulder, looked down to see blood spreading across his shirt. A sniper, hidden somewhere in the buildings surrounding the street. He dove for cover as more shots followed, the shooter methodically working through targets. A deputy screamed and fell. Another scrambled behind the jail. Marshal Colton dragged Cole into the telegraph office and slammed the door. "How bad?" he asked, examining Cole's wound. "Through and through. Missed anything vital. I'll live." "Can you ride?" "I can do whatever I need to do." Colton nodded grimly. "Then here's what's happening. We're taking William out the back, getting horses, and riding hard for Carson City. We leave in 10 minutes. Gather whatever you need." "What about the other deputies?" "The town." "The deputies come with us. The town—" Colton's face hardened. "The town made its choice when it allowed the Reeves family to rule through fear. I'll send proper law enforcement back once William is secure, but right now, my job is getting this prisoner to trial alive." They assembled in the alley behind the jail, Cole, Colton, 4 deputies, and William in chains. Horses were brought from the stable. The wounded deputy was left in the care of the town doctor, who'd been roused from sleep by the gunfire. William hadn't spoken since the failed jailbreak, but as they prepared to ride, he looked at Cole with those empty eyes. 15 years is a long time to nurse a grudge, Ethan. Was it worth it? Becoming exactly what I am, a killer? I'm nothing like you." "No? You've killed for money. You've followed orders that destroyed families. You've lied, manipulated, and infiltrated. The only difference between us is you think your cause justifies your methods. Newsflash, so do I. I didn't murder innocent people. Neither did I. Everyone I've killed made the mistake of standing between the Reeves family and what we wanted. They made a choice, just like you're making one now. The only true innocents are the ones who stay out of the way." Colt wanted to argue, to explain that there was a fundamental difference between what William had done and what he himself had become. But looking into those dead eyes, he wondered if William might be right, if 15 years of training for revenge had changed him into something that could never be changed back. If Ethan Vance had died in that wilderness after all, and only a creature shaped by hatred remained. "Enough talk," Marshal Colton said. "Well, we ride now, fast and hard. Anyone comes after us, we don't stop to negotiate." They thundered out of Black Ridge under cover of darkness, 7 riders carrying a prisoner toward federal justice. Behind them, the town that had been ruled by fear for so long watched them go, and Cole wondered if they were relieved or terrified that the iron grip of the Reeves family might finally be loosening. The ride to Carson City would take 3 days. 3 days of watching for ambush, of sleeping in shifts, of keeping William secure while Clayton and Marcus undoubtedly planned their next move. 3 days before William Reeves would stand trial for murder. 3 days before Cole would finally see if the system that had failed his family could be made to work. 3 days before he'd know if 15 years of waiting had been for justice or just for revenge dressed in legal clothes. As they rode through the night, Cole touched the wound on his shoulder and felt the blood already starting to clot. Physical wounds healed. He wondered if the damage to his soul ever would. They reached the first relay station just before dawn. the horses lathered and blowing hard. The station keeper, a grizzled old-timer who'd seen enough frontier violence to recognize trouble when it rode up, took one look at their party and started saddling fresh mounts without being asked.
"Federal business?" he asked Marshal Colton, his eyes lingering on William's shackles. "That's right. We need food, water, and those horses ready in 15 minutes. You being followed?" "Assume yes." The station keeper nodded and moved faster. His wife brought out hardtack, jerky, and canteens while he worked. Cole dismounted stiffly, his shoulder throbbing where the bullet had grazed him. One of the deputies, a young man named Collins, who couldn't have been more than 22, had wrapped it with strips torn from a shirt, but the makeshift bandage was already soaked through with blood. William watched from his horse with those empty eyes, making no attempt to dismount or escape. He looked almost relaxed, as if being taken to trial for murder was merely an inconvenience rather than a death sentence. "You should have that looked at properly," Marshal Colton said, nodding toward Cole's shoulder. "Infection sets in, you could lose the arm." "I'll survive. I've survived worse." "Have you? Or have you just gotten better at ignoring pain?" Cole didn't answer. He accepted a canteen from the station keeper's wife and drank deeply, the water cutting through the dust that coated his throat. Around him, the deputies checked their weapons, scanned the horizon for signs of pursuit, and tried to mask their nervousness with professional efficiency. They were good men, Cole thought, but they hadn't signed up to face down a private army. The Reeves family's attempted jailbreak had shaken them badly. "Marshal," Deputy Collins said quietly, "what happens if they hit us on the road? We're 7 men against however many Clayton Reeves can hire. Those aren't good odds." "Well, then we make them pay for every inch," Colton replied. "But I don't think they'll try a direct assault. Too risky, too public." Clayton's smart enough to know that killing federal officers would bring the full weight of the government down on him. He'll try something more subtle. Like what? Like tampering with witnesses, like bribing judges, like making evidence disappear. The Reeves family didn't build an empire by being stupid or reckless. They built it by corrupting systems from within. William spoke up for the first time since they'd left Black Ridge, his voice carrying that same flat, emotionless quality. "You're learning, Marshal. My brother Clayton understands that violence is the last resort of the uncreative. He'll destroy you through lawyers and politicians, through bought testimony and convenient accidents. By the time this trial begins, your case will be so full of holes, it'll collapse under its own weight." "You seem awfully confident for a man facing the gallows." "I'm confident because I understand how the world works. You think truth matters? You think justice is some pure force that sweeps away corruption? Justice is what men with power decide it is. And my family has more power than you can comprehend." Cole moved closer to William's horse, his hand resting on his colt. "Your confidence is going to look real stupid when they put the rope around your neck." William's empty eyes met his. "Will it? Tell me, Ethan, what happens if I'm acquitted? What happens if Clayton's lawyers shred the prosecution's case and I walk free? Will you accept the verdict, or will you finish what you started 15 years ago?" "The jury will convict you. They'll see the truth. The jury will see what Clayton wants them to see. They'll hear testimony from character witnesses who will swear I'm a pillar of the community. They'll hear expert analysis suggesting the Harrison boy was reaching for his weapon. They'll hear doubt, reasonable doubt, and that's all a jury needs to acquit. You know I'm right. You've seen how the system works, or rather, how it doesn't work when money is involved." Cole wanted to argue, to insist that federal courts were different, that Carson City wasn't under the Reeves family's thumb the way Black Ridge was. But doubt gnawed at him. William was right about one thing. Money corrupted systems, and the Reeves brothers had plenty of money. "Mount up," Colton ordered. "We're losing darkness, and I want to make the next station before full light." They rode through the breaking dawn, the landscape transforming from black to gray to gold as the sun climbed over the eastern mountains. Cole's shoulder burned with every jarring step his horse took, but he focused on staying alert, scanning the terrain for ambush points, watching William for any sign of an escape attempt. None came. William rode like a man on a leisurely journey rather than a prisoner being taken to trial. It was unnerving, that absolute calm in the face of potential execution. Cole had expected rage or fear or desperation. Instead, William seemed almost serene,
as if he'd already calculated all possible outcomes and found them acceptable. They covered 30 miles before noon, stopped briefly at another relay station, and pushed on through the afternoon heat. The country they traveled through was harsh and beautiful, high desert punctuated by rock formations that thrust up from the earth like ancient monuments. Perfect ambush country, but they saw no one. Either Clayton had decided not to pursue, or he was planning something more sophisticated. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, Marshal Colton called a halt in a box canyon that offered good defensive positions and only one way in or out. They posted guards, built a small fire, and settled in for the night. William was chained to a boulder 20 feet from the fire, close enough to share the warmth, but far enough that any escape attempt would be immediately obvious. Cole volunteered for first watch, knowing sleep would elude him anyway. His shoulder throbbed with a deep, persistent ache that suggested the deputy had been right about infection setting in. But there would be time to deal with that in Carson City. For now, he had to stay alert, stay functional. Marshal Colton joined him at the canyon entrance, where they had a clear view of the approach. The older man pulled out a pipe and tobacco, packed it methodically, and lit it with a match struck against his boot heel. The sweet smell of tobacco smoke drifted between them. "You did good work back in Black Ridge," Colton said after a long silence. "Infiltrating the Reeves organization, gathering evidence, testifying despite the risk. That took courage. It took 15 years of hate. Maybe, but hate alone doesn't produce results like you achieved. You were smart, patient, disciplined. Those are qualities that go beyond simple revenge." Cole stared out at the darkening landscape, remembering Thorne's training, remembering the boy he'd been, and the man he'd become. "You know what the worst part is? William's probably right. The system will fail. Clayton will buy off witnesses, intimidate the jury, hire lawyers who'll twist the truth until it's unrecognizable. And even if by some miracle William is convicted, Clayton and Marcus walk free. They get to keep their empire, keep destroying families, keep ruling through fear. Where's the justice in that? Justice isn't perfect, son. It's not some divine force that magically sets everything right. It's a human institution, which means it's flawed and messy, and sometimes it fails. But it's still better than the alternative. What alternative? Anarchy? Vigilante violence? A world where the fastest gun makes the rules. You think the Reeves brothers are bad? Imagine a world where every man with a grudge becomes judge, jury, and executioner. That's chaos, not justice. At least chaos would be honest. The system pretends to be fair while letting monsters like the Reeves brothers thrive. Colton drew on his pipe, the ember glowing in the gathering darkness. "I've been a marshal for 23 years. I've seen the system fail more times than I can count. I've watched guilty men walk free because they had money and connections. I've watched innocent men hang because they were poor or the wrong color or just unlucky. It's infuriating, soul-crushing work. But I keep doing it because the alternative is worse. Because every time the system works, every time truth prevails and justice is served, it proves that civilization is possible, that we can be better than our worst instincts." Pretty words, Marshal, but my parents are still dead, and their killers are still breathing. I know, and I'm sorry. But if you abandon the system because it's imperfect, you become part of the problem. You become another man with a gun deciding who lives and who dies based on your personal sense of justice. How's that different from what the Reeves brothers do? Because I'm right and they're wrong. Everyone thinks they're right, son. That's the whole problem. Cole had no answer to that. They stood in silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Behind them, the deputies settled in for the night, taking turns on watch. William remained chained to his boulder, apparently asleep, his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. The night passed without incident, but Cole slept poorly during his off hours, his dreams filled with images of his parents dying, of the Harrison boy falling, of families destroyed by Reeves' violence. He woke before dawn with his shoulder on fire and his mouth tasting like ash. Deputy Collins changed his bandage with hands that shook slightly. The wound looked angry and inflamed, red streaks radiating from the entry point. Infection had definitely set in. "You need a doctor, Mr. Vance." "I need to make sure William Reeves stands trial. After that, I'll worry about doctors." They rode out at first light, pushing the horses hard.
Marshal Colton was clearly concerned about the time they were losing to rest stops and the pace Cole's injury forced them to maintain. But he didn't complain, just kept his eyes on the horizon and his hand near his gun. They made better time on the second day, covering nearly 40 miles before the horses forced another stop. The relay station they reached that evening was larger than the previous ones, almost a small settlement with a store, a blacksmith, and several houses. The station keeper recognized Marshal Colton and immediately offered assistance. "Got a doctor here if you need one. Old Army surgeon who retired out this way. Drinks too much, but his hands are steady enough when he's sober." Colton looked at Cole's shoulder, saw the fever flush in his cheeks, and made the decision. "Get the doctor. We'll stay here tonight and push on in the morning." The doctor turned out to be a bearish man in his 60s with alcohol on his breath and surprisingly gentle hands. He examined Cole's wound, made disapproving noises, and went to work with needle and thread after pouring whiskey over everything to clean it. "Bullet missed the bone but tore up muscle pretty good," he muttered, working by lamplight in the station keeper's parlor. "You're lucky it didn't hit the brachial artery, or you'd have bled out before you made it here. As it is, infection's setting in hard. I'll clean it out, stitch it proper, and give you some willow bark for the fever. But you need rest, not more riding." "How long?" "Week, at least. Maybe 2. "I don't have a week." "Then you'll lose the arm. Your choice." Cole gritted his teeth through the pain as the doctor worked, his mind racing through options. They were still a day and a half from Carson City. If he slowed them down further, they risked giving Clayton more time to orchestrate something. But if he pushed too hard and collapsed, he'd be useless as a witness. "Do what you can to stabilize it," he said finally. "I'll rest when the trial's over." The doctor shook his head but didn't argue. He finished stitching, wrapped the shoulder in clean bandages, and pressed a small bottle into Cole's hand. "Laudanum. Take a spoonful when the pain gets unbearable. But be careful. That stuff will turn you into an addict faster than whiskey." Cole pocketed the bottle without opening it. He'd seen what laudanum did to men, how it replaced one kind of suffering with another. He'd endure the pain. Marshal Colton had posted guards around the station and moved William into a locked storage room under constant watch. Cole found the marshal checking the perimeter as night fell. "How's the shoulder?" Colton asked. "I'll live long enough to testify." "That's a low bar, son." "It's the only one I have." They stood in companionable silence, watching the last light fade from the western sky. In the distance, coyotes howled their evening songs, and somewhere a horse nickered softly. It was peaceful in a way that made Cole's chest ache. This was what life could be without violence and revenge consuming everything. Quiet evenings, simple work, the natural rhythms of the land. But that life had been stolen from him 15 years ago, and he'd spent too long becoming something else to ever get it back. "Marshal," Cole said quietly, "what happens if you're wrong? What happens if the system fails and William walks free?" Colton was silent for a long moment. "Then you'll have to decide who you are. Whether you're a man who believes in laws and institutions, flawed as they are, or whether you're just another killer with a slightly better reason than most. I can't make that choice for you, Ethan. Nobody can. I already know who I am." "Do you? Because from where I stand, you're at a crossroads. You've done everything right so far, gathered evidence, worked within the system, testified honestly. But if the verdict doesn't go your way, you'll be tempted to finish this yourself. And that temptation will define you more than anything that came before." "They murdered my family." "I know. And that's a wound that never fully heals. But you can choose whether it turns you into William Reeves or into someone better. That's the only real power you have left." Cole had no answer to that. They returned to the station, checked on the guards one final time, and settled in for the night. Cole lay on a bedroll in the corner of the main room, his shoulder throbbing despite the doctor's ministrations, his mind churning through possibilities and consequences. Sometime after midnight, he was jolted awake by shouting. He grabbed his Colt and rolled to his feet, ignoring the screaming pain in his shoulder. Outside, gunfire erupted, rapid, chaotic, coming from multiple directions. The ambush he'd been expecting had finally come. Cole burst through the door to find the station yard in chaos. Muzzle flashes lit the darkness like lightning as at least a dozen attackers fired on the station from concealed positions. Deputy Collins was down, clutching his leg and screaming. Another deputy returned fire from behind a water trough, his face stark white in the moonlight.
Marshal Colton was dragging Collins toward cover, exposing himself to hostile fire. Cole provided covering shots, forcing two attackers to duck behind the corral fence. Then he moved toward the storage room where William was being held, suddenly certain this wasn't a rescue attempt, it was an execution. He reached the door just as it burst open from inside. William stumbled out, his chains hanging broken from his wrists, blood streaming from his nose. Behind him came a figure in black, Marcus Reeves, drunk and wild-eyed, holding a pistol. "You son of a bitch," Marcus screamed, not at William but past him, at Cole. "You destroyed everything, our reputation, our business, our family. I'm going to kill you myself." He raised his pistol with a shaking hand. Cole fired first, his bullet taking Marcus in the shoulder and spinning him around. Marcus dropped his gun and fell to his knees, cursing and clutching his wound. William hadn't moved. He stood in the doorway watching his younger brother writhe on the ground, his expression showing nothing. Then his empty eyes found Cole. "He came to break me out," William said calmly, as if discussing the weather. "Killed the guard, broke my chains. Told me Clayton sent him to extract me before the trial. But Clayton didn't send him, did he? Marcus did this on his own, drunk and stupid, and now he's compromised everything." "Help me," Marcus wailed. "William, help me!" William looked down at his brother with something approaching contempt. "You've been a liability your entire life, Marcus. Clayton and I have covered for you, cleaned up your messes, paid your debts. And this is how you repay us? By launching a half-planned assault that gets you shot and proves the prosecution's case that our family is violent and lawless? I was trying to save you. You were trying to be a hero. You always have to prove yourself, don't you? Can't just stay out of the way and let the smart people handle things. Well, congratulations. You've finally succeeded in being useful. You've given them exactly what they needed." The gunfire was dying down as Marshal Colton and the deputies drove off the remaining attackers. 3 bodies lay in the yard, and several horses galloped away into the darkness carrying wounded men. The assault had been brief, violent, and ultimately unsuccessful. Colton approached with his gun drawn, taking in the scene. Marcus bleeding on the ground, William standing over him, Cole holding his Colt steady. "What happened here?" "Marcus Reeves attempted to break his brother out of custody," Cole said. "I stopped him." "That true, William?" William nodded. "Unfortunately, yes. My idiot brother decided to play hero. I had nothing to do with it." "You expect me to believe that?" "I don't care what you believe, Marshal. But think about it. If I'd wanted to escape, why would I still be standing here? I had broken chains, an open door, and chaos providing perfect cover. I could have run. Instead, I stayed. Because unlike Marcus, I understand that running would only make things worse. Better to face trial and be acquitted than spend the rest of my life as a fugitive." Colton studied William's face, looking for deception and apparently finding none. "Take him back to the storage room. Double chains this time, and someone tend to Marcus before he bleeds out. He's evidence now." The rest of the night passed in tense watchfulness. Cole helped guard William personally, not trusting the deputies after one had been killed during the assault. William sat in his chains, seemingly at peace, while outside Marcus groaned and cursed as the doctor worked on his shoulder wound. As dawn broke, Colton assembled what remained of his party. 2 deputies dead, Collins badly wounded, Marcus in custody alongside William. The attackers had been driven off but could return with reinforcements. "We push for Carson City today," Colton announced. "No more stops, no more delays. We ride hard, and we arrive before nightfall, or we die trying. Everyone understand?" They understood. They buried the dead deputies with brief words, loaded Collins and Marcus into a wagon the station keeper provided, and set out on the final leg of their journey. Cole rode despite the fever that made his vision swim, despite the pain that radiated through his entire upper body with every movement. He rode because stopping meant giving up, and he'd come too far to give up now. The day became a blur of heat and pain and single-minded determination. They covered ground at a punishing pace, running the horses harder than was wise, pushing human and animal endurance to the breaking point. Several times, Cole nearly fell from his saddle, saved only by Deputy Collins' steadying hand from the wagon. But as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, the outskirts of Carson City appeared in the distance. Civilization, safety, the promise of a trial that might actually deliver justice. They rode into town like conquering heroes returning from war, dusty and bloody and exhausted. People stopped to stare at the federal marshal's party, at the two prisoners in chains, at the wounded men barely clinging to consciousness. Colton took them directly to the federal courthouse, a substantial stone building that represented everything the Reeves brothers bought justice in Black Ridge was not. Inside, they were met by Judge Harrison Blackwell, a stern man in his 60s who'd built a reputation for being incorruptible. Marshal Colton, your telegram indicated you were bringing a murder suspect. I see you've brought two. William Reeves is charged with murder, Your Honor. Marcus Reeves is charged with attempted jailbreak, assaulting federal officers, and conspiracy. We also have a witness who can testify to the Reeves family's criminal enterprise. Judge Blackwell's eyes found Cole, taking in his blood-soaked bandage, his fever-flushed face, his hand that never strayed far from his gun. This is your witness? He looks like he needs a hospital, not a witness stand. He'll testify, Your Honor. He's waited 15 years for this chance. The judge nodded slowly. Very well. I'm scheduling a preliminary hearing for 3 days from now. That gives the prosecution time to prepare and the defense time to arrange counsel. In the meantime, both prisoners will be held in federal custody with maximum security. No bail, no visitors without court approval. Marshal, I'm assigning additional deputies to guard duty. The Reeves family's reputation precedes them. Thank you, Your Honor. William was taken away to the federal holding cells, his face showing nothing even as the iron doors clanged shut behind him. Marcus, still bleeding and cursing, was carried to the prison infirmary. Cole watched them disappear, feeling a strange emptiness now that the chase was over. Come on, Colton said gently, taking Cole's good arm. Let's get you to a real doctor before you collapse. The next 3 days passed in a haze of medical treatment and deposition testimony. The doctor who examined Cole's shoulder shook his head in disbelief that the infection hadn't killed him already, then spent hours cleaning the wound and dosing him with every medicine available. Cole drifted in and out of fevered consciousness, his dreams filled with fire and blood and empty eyes watching him from darkness. When the fever finally broke on the evening of the second day, Cole woke to find Marshal Colton sitting beside his bed in the boarding house room they'd secured. Welcome back, the marshal said. You gave us a scare there. Doctor said another day and the infection would have spread past saving. Cole's throat was dry as desert sand. Colton helped him drink water, then settled back in his chair. The preliminary hearing is tomorrow. You strong enough to testify? I'll testify if I have to crawl to the courthouse. I figured you'd say that. The prosecutor's been reviewing your deposition. She's confident we have a strong case. Your eyewitness testimony, Harrison's corroborating statement, Marcus's attack proving the family's violent nature. The defense will try to discredit you, claim you're motivated by revenge and your testimony isn't reliable. But the facts are on our side. The defense is Clayton's lawyer? Lawyers, plural. He's hired a whole team from San Francisco. Expensive ones. They arrived yesterday and immediately started filing motions. Change of venue, dismiss charges, suppress evidence. Judge Blackwell denied all of them, but it shows the fight we're facing. Cole absorbed this, trying to organize his fever-scattered thoughts. What about Clayton himself? Where is he? Here in Carson City, staying at the best hotel, holding court like some kind of king in exile. He's been visiting William daily, the only visitor the judge has approved, probably coordinating their defense strategy. And Marcus? In the infirmary, singing like a bird. Turns out when you're wounded and facing federal charges, family loyalty evaporates quickly. He's been telling us everything, the organization's structure, the various crimes, even admitting that Clayton ordered the jailbreak attempt, though he's claiming William didn't know about it. The prosecution is considering offering him immunity in exchange for testimony. Cole felt cold rage building in his chest. You're going to let him walk after everything he's done? We're going to use him to put William and Clayton away forever. Sometimes you have to make deals with small devils to catch bigger ones. You know that. Marcus shot my mother in the back. Colton's expression softened. I know, son, and I'm sorry, but we can't prove that crime. It happened 15 years ago with no physical evidence and no witnesses willing to testify. What we can prove is the Harrison murder and the pattern of criminal enterprise. If Marcus's testimony helps us do that, we use him. Justice isn't always satisfying, but it's still justice. Cole wanted to argue,
to insist that letting Marcus escape punishment was a betrayal of everything they'd fought for, but exhaustion overwhelmed him, and he fell back into restless sleep. The next morning, Cole dressed in the new clothes Colton had purchased for him: black suit, white shirt, string tie. He looked almost respectable, like a businessman rather than a killer. The effect was intentional, Colton explained. The defense would try to portray him as a violent vigilante. The prosecution needed to present him as a credible witness. They walked to the courthouse through Carson City's morning streets, attracting curious looks from citizens who'd heard about the upcoming trial. The courtroom was already packed when they arrived, spectators fighting for seats to witness what promised to be the trial of the decade. Cole took his place in the witness section, his shoulders still aching despite the bandages and medicine. Across the room, he saw Clayton Reeves sitting with his legal team, looking every inch the respectable businessman in an expensive suit and polished shoes. Their eyes met, and Clayton smiled. Not warmly, but with the confidence of a man who believed he'd already won. Then William was brought in, shackled and guarded, his empty eyes surveying the courtroom with detached interest. He looked completely at ease, as if this were a routine business meeting rather than a trial that could end with him hanging from a rope. Judge Blackwell entered, and everyone rose. The preliminary hearing began. The prosecution, a sharp woman named Catherine Walsh, who'd built her reputation on taking down corrupt politicians, laid out the case with clinical precision. William Reeves had shot and killed an unarmed young man in cold blood. There was eyewitness testimony, there was a grieving family, there was a pattern of violent behavior by the Reeves organization. The evidence supported charging William with first-degree murder. The defense, led by a silver-haired attorney named Bancroft, who probably cost more per hour than most men earned in a month, argued that the evidence was circumstantial and tainted. Their primary witness, Ethan Vance, had infiltrated the Reeves organization under false pretenses, motivated by a 15-year-old grudge. His testimony was unreliable, colored by revenge. The Harrison boy had been armed, making William's actions potentially defensible, and the subsequent attacks on the federal party were the work of Marcus Reeves acting independently, not proof of William's guilt. Back and forth they went, legal arguments flowing like water, each side building their case. Cole watched and listened, trying to gauge which way the judge was leaning. Finally, Judge Blackwell called for a recess, studied his notes, and rendered his decision. Based on the evidence presented, I find sufficient cause to bind William Reeves over for trial on charges of first-degree murder. Marcus Reeves will face separate charges for his assault on federal officers. Trial will begin in 2 weeks. Bail is denied for both defendants. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell, and Cole felt something release in his chest. Relief, vindication, hope. They'd cleared the first hurdle. William would stand trial. But as Cole watched Clayton comfort his brother with a hand on the shoulder, watched the expensive lawyers gather their papers with confident efficiency, watched the whole machinery of wealth and influence prepare for battle, he understood that the real fight was just beginning. The trial itself was scheduled to last 2 weeks, but it stretched to 3 as the defense employed every delay tactic imaginable. Cole spent those weeks recovering his strength, preparing his testimony, and watching the legal battle unfold. The prosecution presented their case systematically. Abraham Harrison testified about the shooting, his voice breaking as he described watching his son die. Cole took the stand and walked the jury through everything: his infiltration of the organization, William's cold-blooded murder, the subsequent threats against the Harrison family. The prosecution introduced Marcus's deposition, which corroborated key details even as it attempted to shield Clayton from blame. The defense tore into every piece of evidence. They called character witnesses who swore William was a peaceful, law-abiding citizen. They brought in experts who testified about the psychological unreliability of eyewitness testimony, especially from someone with an admitted grudge. They suggested Cole had fabricated evidence to frame an innocent man. They painted the Harrison shooting as a tragic accident blown out of proportion by an unreliable witness with an axe to grind. And through it all, William sat quietly, his empty eyes watching the proceedings with detached interest, occasionally leaning over to whisper with his lawyers, but mostly remaining still as a statue. Clayton attended every day of the trial, sitting in the front row of the gallery, a visible symbol of family solidarity and implied threat. Cole could feel the land baron's eyes on him during his testimony, could sense the hatred radiating from the man who'd ordered his parents' deaths.
The jury deliberated for 2 full days. Cole paced the hallway outside the courtroom, unable to sit still, unable to think about anything except the 12 people who held William Reeves's fate in their hands. Marshal Colton tried to reassure him that they'd presented a strong case, but Cole could only remember William's confidence, Clayton's smile, the defense's systematic dismantling of every piece of evidence. What if the jury believed the defense? What if reasonable doubt prevailed? What if William walked free? On the afternoon of the second day, the jury sent word they'd reached a verdict. The courtroom filled within minutes, spectators crowding in to hear the outcome. Cole took his seat in the front row, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. William was brought in, his shackles rattling, his face showing nothing. The jury foreman stood, a weathered rancher who'd spent 2 weeks listening to lawyers argue about truth and justice and reasonable doubt. Judge Blackwell's voice cut through the silence. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. In the matter of Territory versus William Reeves on the charge of first-degree murder, how do you find? The foreman looked directly at William, and for the first time in the entire trial, Cole saw something flicker in those empty eyes. Not fear, exactly, but perhaps the faintest recognition that outcomes mattered after all. We find the defendant guilty. The courtroom erupted. Spectators shouted. Clayton Reeves lunged to his feet, screaming objections. The defense lawyers immediately began filing motions. Judge Blackwell hammered his gavel, demanding order, threatening to clear the court. But Cole heard none of it. He sat frozen, the word echoing in his mind like a bell tolling. Guilty. 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 After 15 years, after countless trials and failures and compromises, after becoming something he barely recognized, justice had actually been served. The system had worked. The truth had prevailed. William Reeves would hang for his crimes. Judge Blackwell restored order and scheduled sentencing for the following morning. William was led away, still showing nothing, while Clayton fought through the crowd toward Cole with murder in his eyes. Marshal Colton intercepted him, placing himself physically between the land baron and his target. "You've destroyed my family," Clayton hissed. "Everything we built, everything we sacrificed for, gone because of one vindictive bastard who couldn't let the past stay buried." "Your family destroyed itself," Cole said quietly. "I just made sure you paid for it. This isn't over. William may hang, but I'm still free. I still have resources, connections, money, and I will dedicate every dollar and every ounce of influence I possess to making sure you suffer for what you've done." "Get in line," Cole replied. "I've been suffering for 15 years. Your turn now." Colton escorted Clayton from the courthouse before violence could erupt, leaving Cole alone in the emptying courtroom. He sat in the silence, staring at the empty defendant's chair, trying to feel something: triumph, satisfaction, peace. But all he felt was hollow, as if the verdict had carved out something essential and left only emptiness behind. Thorne's voice echoed in his memory. "Don't become them. That's the real challenge." Too late, old man, Cole thought. I became something. Not them, maybe, but something just as hard, just as empty. The sentencing hearing the next morning was brief. Judge Blackwell, citing the premeditated nature of the crime and the defendant's lack of remorse, sentenced William Reeves to death by hanging, to be carried out in 30 days. William accepted the sentence with no visible reaction. When asked if he had any final words, he looked directly at Cole and spoke in that same flat, emotionless voice. "You won, Ethan. The system worked, just like you hoped. I'll hang and you'll feel vindicated. But understand something, you and I are more alike than you want to admit. We both did what we thought was necessary. We both justified our actions with appeals to higher purpose. The only difference is the jury believed your story instead of mine. Doesn't make you righteous, just makes you lucky. I'm nothing like you. Keep telling yourself that. Maybe eventually you'll believe it." William was led away to await execution, and the trial of William Reeves officially concluded. Marcus, in exchange for his testimony and cooperation, received a reduced sentence of 20 years in federal prison. Clayton Reeves, against whom no charges could be proven despite everyone's certainty of his guilt, walked free. That night, Cole sat in his boarding house room staring at the wall, a bottle of whiskey on the table beside him. He'd bought it intending to celebrate, but Now it sat untouched because celebration felt wrong. A man would die because of Cole's testimony, and yes, that man deserved to die. But the act of killing, even through legal means, still felt like a weight on his soul. Marshal Colton found him there an hour after dark, took one look at his face, and sat down without being invited. "You did the right thing," Colton said. "Never doubt that." "Did I? Or did I just trade one kind of violence for another?" "Justice isn't violence, son. It's accountability. William Reeves murdered an innocent young man, and now he'll pay the price. That's how civilization works." "Civilization," Cole repeated bitterly. Funny word for a system that let the Reeves brothers murder and steal for years before someone finally stopped them. Where was civilization when they killed my parents? Where was justice then? Nowhere. And that's a failure we all share. Every person in Black Ridge who stayed silent, every lawman who looked the other way, every system that enabled their crimes. But you changed that. You refused to let them get away with it. That matters. Does it? Clayton's still free. He'll rebuild, recruit new men, continue the same violence. I stopped one brother, but the other two are still breathing. Colton's expression hardened. Don't go down that road. You've done everything legally, honorably. You've proven the system can work. Don't throw that away by becoming the vigilante they claimed you were. What if that's what it takes? What if legal justice isn't enough? Then you'll have become William Reeves, just another killer with a slightly better reason. Is that really who you want to be? Cole had no answer. They sat in silence as the night deepened outside, two men wrestling with questions that had no easy answers, about justice and revenge, about systems and individuals, about the cost of becoming whatever it takes to fight monsters. Finally, Colton stood to leave. At the door, he paused. "The execution is in 30 days. You planning to attend?" "I don't know." "Think about it. Sometimes seeing the end of something is the only way to truly let it go." After Colton left, Cole finally opened the whiskey bottle and poured a drink. He raised it toward the window, toward Black Ridge Valley somewhere in the distance, toward the ghosts of his parents who'd waited 15 years for this moment. "Justice," he said quietly, "just like I promised." But the word felt hollow, and the whiskey tasted like ash, and the victory he'd fought so long to achieve felt less like triumph, and more like the ending of something he couldn't quite define. Not his quest for revenge, that would end on the gallows in 30 days, but something else, something fundamental about who Ethan Vance had been and who Cole Hartley had become. He finished the drink and poured another, knowing that sleep wouldn't come easily tonight and might never come easily again. Outside, Carson City slept peacefully, unaware that in a boarding house room, a man sat wrestling with the knowledge that winning could feel so much like losing and justice could taste so much like defeat. The 30 days passed like a slow hemorrhage, each one bleeding away a piece of whatever certainty Cole had left. He spent them in Carson City, ostensibly recovering from his wound, but really just existing in a kind of suspended animation, waiting for the moment when William Reeves would drop through the gallows trapdoor and 15 years of purpose would finally reach its conclusion. Marshal Colton checked on him daily, concerned about the hollowness he saw in Cole's eyes, the way he'd stopped eating properly, stopped sleeping through the night. The doctor who'd treated his shoulder declared him physically healed, but noticed the same thing everyone else did, that Cole looked like a man who'd won a battle but lost something essential in the victory. On the 15th day, word reached Carson City that Clayton Reeves had returned to Black Ridge and was consolidating his power. With William awaiting execution and Marcus imprisoned, Clayton had become the sole ruler of the family empire. Reports suggested he was hiring new men, expanding operations, and making examples of anyone who'd spoken against the family during the trial. The Reeves' reign of terror wasn't over. It had simply been reduced from 3 tyrants to 1. Cole read the reports with growing fury and frustration. They'd cut off one head of the Hydra, but the monster still lived. William would hang, justice would theoretically be served, but nothing fundamental would change in Black Ridge Valley. The same families would still be terrorized, the same land would still be stolen, the same violence would still be the currency of power. "I should go back," Cole said to Marshal Colton on the 16th day. "Someone needs to stop Clayton." "That someone is the law, not you. I've already sent requests to the territorial governor for a special investigator to examine the Reeves family's business practices. It'll take time, but time? Cole's laugh was bitter. How many families will Clayton destroy while your investigator shuffles papers? How many more sons will die like the Harrison boy? I don't know. But the alternative is you riding back to Blackridge and killing Clayton in cold blood. That's not justice, Ethan. That's murder. Maybe murder is what's needed. Listen to yourself. You sound exactly like William did during the trial, justifying violence as necessary, claiming the ends justify the means. You've become what you hunted. The words hit like a physical blow because they were true. Cole could feel it in his bones, the transformation that had been happening slowly over 15 years and had accelerated during his time infiltrating the Reeves organization. He'd learned to kill without hesitation, to lie without guilt, to sacrifice others for his greater purpose. He'd become efficient, cold, ruthless. He'd become a weapon, and weapons didn't know how to be anything else. On the 20th day, Cole received an unexpected visitor at his boarding house. Abraham Harrison, the father who'd lost his son to William's bullet, climbed the stairs with the slow, painful gait of a man carrying unbearable weight. "Mr. Vance," Harrison said when Cole opened the door. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all. Please, come in." They sat across from each other in the small room, two men bound by grief and the inadequacy of justice to heal it. Harrison looked like he'd aged a decade in the months since his son's death, his face carved with lines of sorrow that would never fully fade. "I came to thank you," Harrison said quietly, "for testifying, for making sure William Reeves faces consequences for what he did. I know it cost you, the injury, the risk, exposing yourself, but it mattered. It mattered that someone stood up and told the truth. I'm sorry it wasn't enough to bring your son back. Nothing could do that. But knowing his killer will hang, knowing there's some accountability in this world, that helps. Not much, but some. My wife and I, we can lay our boy to rest knowing he didn't die for nothing, that his death meant something, that it helped expose the Reeves family for what they are." Cole nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Harrison's gratitude should have felt good, should have validated everything he'd done. Instead, it just reminded him of his own parents, who'd received no justice, no accountability, no one standing up to tell their truth. "What will you do now?" Harrison asked. "After the execution?" "I don't know. Go back to Blackridge, I suppose. See what's left." There's nothing left for men like us in that valley. The Reeves family poisoned it, and even with William gone and Marcus locked up, Clayton's still there, still powerful. My family, what's left of us, we're leaving. Going to California, starting over where the name Reeves doesn't mean anything, I'd suggest you consider the same. Run away? No. Choose life over death. Choose future over past. Choose to be something other than a weapon aimed at people who don't deserve the power you give them by staying focused on them. After Harrison left, Cole sat for hours turning those words over in his mind. Choose life over death. Choose future over past. As if it were that simple. As if 15 years of single-minded purpose could be redirected like a river changing course. As if the man he'd become could transform back into the boy he'd been. But that boy was dead. Had died in the wilderness, or in Thorne's brutal training, or somewhere along the path of becoming Cole Hartley. Only the weapon remained, and weapons without targets had no purpose. On the 25th day, Clayton Reeves arrived in Carson City. He checked into the finest hotel with an entourage of lawyers and bodyguards, making no secret of his presence. Word spread quickly that he'd come to witness his brother's execution, to provide family support in William's final hours, to demonstrate that the Reeves family remained unbroken despite this setback. Cole heard the news and felt cold rage crystallize in his chest. Clayton was here, vulnerable, separated from his fortress in Blackridge. One shot, one confrontation, and the man who'd ordered his parents' murder would finally face consequences. He was loading his Colt when Marshal Colton kicked open his door. "Don't," Colton said, his own gun drawn and pointed at Cole. "Don't make me arrest you. Don't throw away everything you've accomplished by becoming a murderer." "He killed my parents. He ordered it, and William pulled the trigger, and Marcus shot my mother in the back. Clayton's just as guilty as his brothers, but he walks free because we can't prove it. Where's the justice in that? There isn't any. Life's not fair and the guilty don't always pay. But if you kill Clayton, you'll hang right alongside William, Is that what you want? Is that what your parents would want? My parents are dead. They don't want anything. Then what do you want, Ethan? Really want? Because if it's justice, you already got it. William hangs in 5 days. If it's revenge, then you're throwing away your life for the temporary satisfaction of killing a man who honestly isn't worth the rope they'd hang you with. So which is it? Cole's hand trembled on the Colt's grip. Every instinct Thorne had trained into him screamed to take the shot, to end Clayton Reeves right here and now, regardless of consequences. But another voice, quieter, nearly drowned out by years of rage but still present, whispered that killing Clayton wouldn't bring his parents back, wouldn't heal the damage, wouldn't make him whole again. It would just make him a killer. Nothing more, nothing less. Slowly, he uncocked the hammer and set the gun on the table. Colton lowered his own weapon and stepped fully into the room. Smart choice. Now I'm going to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. When William hangs, will that be enough? Or are you going to spend the rest of your life hunting Clayton? I don't know. Figure it out. Because you're standing at a fork in the road, and the path you choose defines everything that comes after. You can be the man who brought a killer to justice, or you can be the man who became a killer himself. But you can't be both. After Colton left, Cole sat staring at his Colt, at the weapon that had defined him for so long. He thought about Thorne's training, about the boy who'd fled into the wilderness, about the man he'd become. He thought about William's words during sentencing, that they were more alike than Cole wanted to admit, and he wondered if proving William wrong mattered more than killing Clayton Reeves. The night before the execution, Cole couldn't sleep. He paced his room until midnight, then gave up and walked through Carson City's dark streets, eventually finding himself outside the jail where William waited for dawn. The guard on duty recognized him and started to turn him away, but Cole pressed a silver dollar into his hand. 5 minutes. I just need 5 minutes. The guard hesitated, then nodded and led him to William's cell. The condemned man sat on a narrow cot, reading a book by lamplight. He looked up as Cole approached and showed no surprise. I wondered if you'd come, William said, setting the book aside. Most men want to look their demons in the eye before they're exorcised. I'm not here for closure or wisdom or whatever else the dying are supposed to offer. Then why are you here? Cole gripped the bars, his knuckles white. I need to know if you regret it, any of it. The murders, the violence, the families you destroyed. I need to know if some part of you recognizes that what you did was evil. William studied him with those empty eyes, and for a moment Cole thought he'd refuse to answer. Then something shifted in his expression, not quite emotion, but perhaps the shadow of it. No, William said quietly. I don't regret the actions. I regret getting caught. I regret that Marcus's stupidity exposed us. I regret that Clayton will have to rebuild what we spent years constructing. But the things I did, they were necessary for our goals, and I'd do them again if given the chance. Does that make me evil? Maybe. Or maybe it just makes me honest about what power requires. You murdered my parents for land, for money. How is that necessary? Your parents stood between us and expansion. They refused reasonable offers. They were organizing resistance. From our perspective, they were obstacles that needed removing, just like the Harrison boy was an obstacle, just like you would have been if we'd realized who you were. It's not personal, Ethan. It's business. It was personal to me. Of course it was. And that's the difference between us. You make everything personal, every slight, every loss, every injustice. You turned your parents' death into a 15-year crusade that consumed your entire life. I would have mourned for a week and moved on. Your way leads to this moment, me hanging and you hollow. My way leads to empires. Which approach is really better? Cole wanted to argue, to insist that caring about justice and family and basic human decency was what separated civilization from barbarism. But looking at William's calm face, his complete lack of remorse, his genuine belief that efficiency and pragmatism justified any action, Cole realized that no argument would penetrate that emptiness. Some men were simply broken in ways that couldn't be fixed. William Reeves was one of them, and killing him wouldn't heal the damage he'd done. It would just prevent him from doing more. I hope you rot in whatever comes next, Cole said. There is no next. There's just the void. And at least I'll face it knowing I built something, however briefly. What will you have, Ethan? What comes after revenge is satisfied? Have you even thought about it? Cole had no answer. He turned and walked away, William's question echoing in his mind. What comes after? The execution was scheduled for dawn. Cole woke before first light, dressed in his black suit, and walked to the courthouse square where the gallows had been erected. A crowd was already gathering, some seeking justice, some seeking spectacle, all drawn by the human fascination with death. Marshal Colton found him at the edge of the crowd. You sure you want to be here? I need to see it finished. Finished or ended, because those aren't the same thing. Before Cole could respond, a murmur rippled through the crowd. William was being led from the jail, flanked by guards, his hands bound behind his back. He walked steadily, showing no fear, his empty eyes scanning the crowd until they found Cole. They locked gazes across 50 feet of dusty ground, executioner and condemned, hunter and prey, two men bound together by violence and the inadequacy of justice to truly resolve anything. Clayton Reeves stood near the gallows, surrounded by his lawyers and bodyguards, his face a mask of controlled grief that didn't reach his eyes. He was playing the loyal brother, the grieving family member, the pillar of society witnessing a terrible miscarriage of justice. The performance was masterful. The judge read the sentence. The hangman checked his knots. A priest offered last rites, which William declined with a shake of his head. Through it all, William remained calm, almost serene. William Reeves, the judge intoned, you have been convicted of murder and sentenced to death by hanging. Do you have any final words? William's gaze found Cole again. Just one thing. To Ethan Vance, thank you. You freed me from the burden of empire, of family, of pretending to care about anything beyond my own survival. In a few moments, I'll be beyond consequence, beyond judgment, beyond the reach of men like you who need revenge to give their lives meaning. Can you say the same? The trapdoor dropped. William Reeves fell. The rope snapped taut, and his neck broke with an audible crack that silenced the crowd. His body swung gently in the morning breeze, lifeless, empty, finished. Cole watched without expression, waiting to feel something, triumph, relief, satisfaction, closure. But there was only numbness, a vast emptiness that stretched from horizon to horizon in his soul. William was dead. Justice had been served, the system had worked, and Cole felt nothing. The crowd began to disperse, some satisfied, some disappointed that the execution had been quick rather than dramatic. Clayton Reeves stood motionless, staring at his brother's corpse, and Cole saw something flicker across his face. Not grief, but calculation, already planning his next moves. Cole pushed through the crowd toward him. Clayton's bodyguards moved to intercept, but Clayton waved them back. Mr. Vance, Clayton said, his voice carefully neutral. Satisfied? This isn't over. No? My brother just hanged for a crime you claim he committed. Marcus is in prison. The great Reeves family empire has been brought low by your testimony. What more do you want? You, facing the same justice William just did. Clayton's mask cracked, revealing something cold and ancient beneath. You have no proof of anything, no witnesses willing to testify, no evidence that would stand up in court. You destroyed William and Marcus, but you'll never touch me. I'm too careful, too connected, too smart to make the mistakes they made. So yes, Ethan, this is over. You got your revenge, your moment of triumph. Now go away and let me rebuild what you've torn down. And if I don't, then you'll discover that I'm far more dangerous than my brothers ever were. William was efficient but clumsy. Marcus was passionate but stupid. I'm neither. I'm patient, calculating, and I never forget a debt. You've made yourself my enemy, and I have a very long memory. So ask yourself, is continuing this vendetta worth spending the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, wondering when my knife will find your back? They stood there in the morning light, the gallows between them, William's body still swaying gently. Cole's hand rested on his Colt, and he knew he could draw and fire before Clayton's bodyguards reached him. One shot, straight through Clayton's heart, and all three brothers would be dead. But then what? He'd hang just like William had, or die in a shootout with the bodyguards, and the cycle of violence would continue unbroken. The Reeves empire would pass to some other ruthless man, and nothing fundamental would change except that Ethan Vance would be dead and forgotten. Thorne's voice, clearer than it had been in years. The man who controls his emotions controls the situation.
Cole forced his hand away from his gun. You're right. This is over. William's dead, Marcus is imprisoned, and you're not worth becoming a murderer for. But hear me, Clayton. I'm going back to Blackridge. I'm going to help rebuild what your family destroyed. And every time you try to expand, every time you try to intimidate or steal or murder, I'll be there. Not as a killer, but as a witness. As someone who'll testify, who'll document, who'll make sure the law knows exactly what you're doing. You want to rebuild your empire? You'll do it with me watching every move. Clayton studied him, trying to determine if this was a real threat or empty bravado. Whatever he saw in Cole's face must have convinced him because his expression hardened. Then you'll die slowly in Blackridge, watching everything you try to build crumble under the weight of money and power you can't match. I'll destroy you financially, socially, economically. I'll make you irrelevant. And when you're broken and destitute and forgotten, I'll still be here, still in control, still winning. That's the real justice, Ethan. Not dramatic executions, but the slow grinding reality that men like me always prevail over men like you. We'll see. Cole turned and walked away, leaving Clayton standing beneath his brother's corpse. Two men who'd built their lives on violence, now separated only by which side of the law they'd fallen. Marshal Colton caught up with him at the edge of the square. That was either very brave or very stupid walking away from him like that. Maybe both. But I meant what I said. I'm going back to Blackridge. To do what? Play watchdog against a man who owns half the territory? You'll be dead inside a year, either from a bullet in the back or the slow grind of fighting a battle you can't win. Maybe, but at least I'll die trying to build something instead of destroy it. That has to count for something. Colton shook his head but didn't argue. If you're determined to do this, at least do it smart. I'll help you get official status as a territorial investigator. It's not much, but it gives you some legal authority to poke into things. And I'll make sure the governor's office knows to pay attention when you send reports. It's not much, but it's more than I had an hour ago. Thank you, Marshal, for everything. They shook hands. Two men who'd fought for justice in an unjust world and achieved something less than victory but more than defeat. Then Cole collected his horse from the stable and began the long ride back to Blackridge Valley. The journey took 3 days, and Cole used them to think about what came next. He had no illusions about the difficulty of what he was attempting. Clayton Reeves controlled vast resources, had connections throughout the territory, and 15 years of experience consolidating power. Cole was one man with a wounded shoulder, a Colt revolver, and stubborn determination. But he also had something Clayton didn't. He had nothing left to lose. No family, no home, no life beyond this purpose. That made him dangerous in a way Clayton's hired guns couldn't match. As he crested the ridge overlooking Blackridge Valley on the afternoon of the third day, Cole was struck by how little had changed. The same sprawling town, the same railroad tracks cutting through the valley's heart, the same Reeves mansion brooding over everything from its hilltop perch. William's execution had removed one player, but the game continued. He rode directly to what remained of the Vance homestead. The burned ruins had been cleared away years ago, the land absorbed into the Reeves empire like it had never belonged to anyone else. But the location remained, a patch of empty ground marked only by the brick chimney that had been too solid to burn. Cole dismounted and stood where his parents' house had been, trying to feel some connection to the boy he'd been, to the family he'd lost. But there was only emptiness. Too much time had passed, too much had changed. This ground held no answers, no comfort, no resolution. Thought I might find you here, Cole spun, his hand dropping to his Colt, then relaxed when he recognized Sheriff Warren. The corrupt lawman who'd spent years in the Reeves pocket looked older and somehow smaller, diminished by the trial's exposure of how completely he'd failed his duty. Come to run me out of town, Sheriff? Come to resign, actually. Heading to the territorial capital tomorrow to tender my badge. Figure after what came out in the trial, I'm done in law enforcement anyway. Thought you should know. Why tell me? Warren looked uncomfortable. Because I owe you an apology, though I don't expect you to accept it. I knew what the Reeves brothers were doing. I knew about your parents, about the Harrison boy, about dozens of other crimes, and I did nothing. Told myself I was keeping the peace, maintaining order, protecting the town from chaos. But really I was just protecting my position and my paycheck. So, I'm sorry, for what it's worth. Cole studied the broken man before him and felt only pity. Warren had made his choices and would live with them, just as Cole would live with his. What will you do now? Leave. Start over somewhere they don't know my name or my shame. Maybe try to be better than I was here. Maybe just drink myself to death. Haven't decided yet. Warren turned to leave, then paused. Word of advice, though, Clayton's consolidating power fast. He's hiring new men, expanding operations, and making examples of anyone who testified against his family. You're at the top of his list. Watch yourself. After Warren left, Cole stood alone in the ruins of his childhood home, contemplating the strange turns life had taken. The boy who'd fled this place 15 years ago had been innocent, frightened, powerless. The man who'd returned was none of those things, but he also wasn't sure what he was: hero or weapon, justice seeker or revenge ghost, builder or destroyer. Maybe he was all of them. Maybe that was the price of becoming whatever it took to fight monsters. He spent the next weeks establishing himself in Black Ridge, using the modest authority Marshal Colton had secured for him to investigate the Reeves family's operations. He rented a small office above the general store, one of the few businesses not owned by Clayton, and began documenting everything he could discover about land acquisitions, business practices, intimidation tactics. The work was tedious and dangerous. Clayton's men watched him constantly, making no secret of their surveillance. Twice, Cole was jumped in alleys and beaten badly enough to require medical attention. Several businesses refused to talk to him out of fear. Others talked but recanted their statements when Clayton's lawyers paid them visits. But slowly, painstakingly, Cole built a case. He found families willing to testify about stolen land, workers willing to document unsafe conditions and withheld wages, merchants willing to complain about protection rackets. He sent detailed reports to the territorial governor's office, copied every document he could obtain, and created a paper trail that even Clayton's money couldn't completely erase. 6 months after William's execution, the territorial government finally acted. Special investigators arrived in Black Ridge, armed with warrants and federal authority. They examined the Reeves family's books, interviewed witnesses, and began building criminal cases. Clayton fought back with every weapon in his arsenal: lawyers, politicians, bribed officials, intimidated witnesses. But the machinery of justice, once properly engaged, ground forward with inexorable momentum. Indictments were issued, assets were frozen. The empire Clayton had worked so hard to rebuild began crumbling under legal scrutiny. It wasn't dramatic. There was no shootout, no final confrontation, no moment of climactic justice. Just paperwork and depositions and court hearings that stretched across months. The slow, bureaucratic dismantling of corruption. Cole attended every hearing, testified at every trial, provided evidence for every indictment. He watched Clayton's empire collapse piece by piece, watched the arrogant land baron transform into a desperate man fighting for survival, watched the same system that had hanged William now strangle Clayton with regulations and statutes and seized assets. The final blow came 15 months after William's execution. Clayton Reeves, facing multiple criminal charges and bankruptcy from legal fees, was found dead in his study with a pistol in his hand. The official verdict was suicide, though rumors suggested one of his former associates had decided Clayton knew too much and posed too great a liability. Cole learned of Clayton's death from a messenger who delivered the news to his office. He received it without emotion, filed his final report documenting the Reeves family's complete dissolution, and closed the ledger he'd been keeping since returning to Black Ridge. 3 brothers, all dead or imprisoned. An empire dismantled. Justice eventually served. And Ethan Vance, hollow as the day William had hanged, still searching for whatever came after revenge. He stood in his office as the sun set over Black Ridge Valley, painting the sky in shades of red and gold that reminded him of fire and blood. Below him, the town was changing. With the Reeves family gone, new businesses were opening, families were returning, life was slowly recovering like grass growing back after a wildfire. People called him a hero, the man who'd brought down the Reeves empire, who'd exposed corruption, who'd proven that even the powerful could face consequences. They wanted to celebrate him, thank him, make him some kind of symbol. But Cole felt nothing except exhaustion and the nagging question William had asked before his execution. What comes after? He'd spent 15 years preparing for revenge, 3 more years executing it and dismantling what remained.
He'd accomplished everything he'd set out to do. His parents had been avenged. The Reeves brothers were gone. Justice had prevailed, and he had no idea what to do with the rest of his life. The door to his office opened, and Marshal Colton entered. The federal marshal had retired 6 months earlier but had stayed in the territory, claiming he wanted to see this business finished properly.
"Heard about Clayton," Colton said, settling into a chair. "How are you taking it?" "I don't know. I thought I'd feel something."
Relief, satisfaction, vindication, but there's just emptiness. That's because revenge is a destructive force. It tears things down, burns them away, leaves nothing but ashes. You built your entire adult life around destroying the Reeves family, and now that they're gone, you're discovering that destruction creates voids, not fulfillment. So what do I do with the void? Fill it with something constructive. You proved you can investigate, document, build legal cases. The territory needs men like you, honest men willing to fight corruption through proper channels. I could recommend you for a marshal's position if you're interested. Cole considered it. Marshal Vance, riding from town to town, enforcing federal law, hunting criminals, maintaining order. It would give him purpose, direction, something to fill the hours between sleeping and waking. But it would also be the same thing he'd been doing for nearly 20 years, hunting, destroying, eliminating threats. Just with a badge to make it legal. "I don't know if I can do that, Marshal. I don't know if I trust myself with that kind of authority. I became too good at violence, too comfortable with it. I'm not sure I should be the one enforcing the law when I've broken so many laws myself." "Well, what laws did you break that weren't in service of justice?" "I killed men for money as part of my cover. I stood by while families were terrorized. I let the Harrison boy die because stopping it would have compromised my mission. Those were choices I made, and they were wrong regardless of my ultimate purpose." Colton was quiet for a long moment. "You're right, they were wrong. But you recognize that they were wrong, and you've spent the last year trying to make amends by building something better. That's more than most men manage. Don't let the weight of necessary evils prevent you from doing future good." "I'm not sure I know how to do good anymore. I only know how to fight." "Then learn something new. This valley needs rebuilding, not with guns and violence, but with honest work and community. You want to honor your parents' memory? Do what they did. Build a ranch, raise cattle, contribute to something lasting. That's a legacy worth having." After Colton left, Cole stood at his office window and looked out at the valley his parents had loved. The land was still good, rich grass, clean water, endless sky. The Reeves mansion on the hill would be auctioned off to pay debts, the family holdings broken up and redistributed. There would be opportunities for men willing to work. He thought about his parents' ranch, about the life they'd built with their own hands, about the future they'd envisioned before it was stolen. He thought about the boy he'd been, working alongside his father, learning to mend fences and judge cattle and read the weather in the clouds. That boy was dead. But maybe some part of him could be resurrected, replanted, given a chance to grow into something that wasn't defined entirely by violence and loss. 3 days later, Cole attended the auction of Reeves family properties. Using money he'd saved from his work as a territorial investigator, plus a loan from the bank, now under new management, he purchased a modest parcel of land in the Eastern Valley. Not the original Vance homestead, which held too many ghosts, but close enough to honor his parents' memory. The land came with a small cabin, some fencing, and water rights. It was a start. He spent the next months building, not fast, not dramatically, but steadily. He repaired the cabin, expanded the fencing, bought a small herd of cattle with money earned from consulting work with the Territorial Investigations Office. He worked dawn to dusk, physical labor that left him too exhausted to dwell on the past. Slowly, the emptiness began to fill with something other than rage and purpose. Not happiness, he wasn't sure he remembered how to be happy, but perhaps contentment, the satisfaction of work done well, of things built rather than destroyed, of contributing to the valley's recovery rather than its devastation. Other families returned or arrived for the first time, drawn by the promise of land free from Reeves' tyranny. The Harrison family, despite their grief, came back from California and reclaimed their property. They worked their ranch with quiet determination, and sometimes Cole would see Abraham Harrison across the valley, and they'd exchange nods. Two men who'd survived the same darkness, building their lives back piece by piece. A year after Clayton's death, Cole was mending fence when a rider approached. He recognized Reese, the young gun hand who'd been part of Thornton's crew, though Reese looked different now, cleaner, less desperate, carrying himself with more dignity. "Mr. Vance," Reese called out, dismounting. "Heard you were ranching now. Wanted to see if it was true." "It's true." "What about you? Still working for the Reeves organization?" "No organization left to work for. After Clayton died and the Empire collapsed, most of us scattered. Some kept hiring out as guns, some turned to outright crime. Few of us tried going straight." He looked uncomfortable. "I know I don't deserve your time after everything I was part of, but I'm looking for honest work. Ranch work. If you're hiring, I can handle horses, cattle, whatever needs doing, and I swear on my life I've left the gun work behind." Cole studied the young man, seeing echoes of his own struggle, trying to leave violence behind, trying to become something better than what circumstances had made him. He thought about Thorne's warning about not becoming the monsters he fought. He thought about mercy and second chances and whether men could really change their fundamental nature. "Wages are low and the work's hard," Cole said finally. "But if you're serious about going straight, I can use the help. Do right by me and we'll get along fine. Cross me and you'll wish you'd stayed a gun for hire. Deal?" Relief flooded Reese's face. "Deal. Thank you, Mr. Vance. You won't regret this." "We'll see. Now grab that hammer and help me finish this fence before dark." They worked together in companionable silence, two men trying to build something in a valley that had seen too much destruction. It wasn't redemption. Cole wasn't sure either of them deserved that. But it was forward motion, and forward motion was better than staying trapped in the past. Over the next 2 years, Cole's ranch grew slowly but steadily. He hired 3 more hands, all of them former Reeves men trying to start over, and together they built something decent. The cattle multiplied, the land prospered, and Cole found himself becoming part of the community in ways he'd never anticipated. People sought his advice on disputes, knowing he'd deal fairly and wasn't beholden to any faction. Families invited him to their homes, grateful for his role in freeing the valley from tyranny. Young men asked him to teach them to shoot, not for violence, but for the practical skill of frontier life. And he taught them while emphasizing discipline and responsibility over speed. He never forgot what he'd been. The weapon Thorne had forged, the cold instrument of revenge that had infiltrated and destroyed the Reeves empire. That part of him remained, carefully controlled but always present. He still slept with his Colt within reach. He still noticed threats and escape routes and tactical advantages. He still moved through the world with the wariness of a man who'd seen its worst. But he was learning to be something else, too. Not just a weapon, but a rancher, a neighbor, a man who contributed to building civilization rather than tearing it down. 5 years after William's execution, on a spring morning when the valley was green with new grass and the sky was impossibly blue, Cole stood on the hill overlooking his ranch and allowed himself a moment of reflection. His parents were still dead. That wound would never fully heal, but their murders had faced justice. Their empire had been dismantled, and the valley they'd loved was recovering. The Vance name, once synonymous with victimhood, now carried weight and respect. It wasn't the ending Cole had imagined during those dark years in the wilderness with Thorne. It wasn't dramatic or satisfying in the way revenge stories were supposed to be. There had been no final shootout, no last stand, no moment of pure triumph. Instead, there had been trials and paperwork and slow legal processes. There had been compromise and ambiguity and the messy reality that justice rarely came pure and clean. There had been the discovery that winning could feel like losing, and that destroying your enemies left voids that were harder to fill than graves. But there had also been rebuilding. There had been families returning to land stolen from them, communities forming without fear, children growing up in a valley no longer ruled by terror. There had been former killers learning to be ranchers, corrupt systems being reformed, and the slow, unglamorous work of making the world slightly less terrible than it had been. And there had been Ethan Vance, the boy who'd watched his parents die, surviving and eventually thriving in the valley that had tried to erase him. Marshal Colton visited that evening, now fully retired and living in a small house in town. They sat on Cole's porch, drinking coffee and watching the sun set over the valley, 2 old warriors at peace. "You've done well," Colton said. "Your parents would be proud." "Would they?" "I became a killer to avenge them. I destroyed lives, hurt families, did things that can't be undone. Is that really something to be proud of? You did what you thought you had to do. And when you were done, you didn't keep destroying, you started building. That's the hard part, Ethan. That's what separates the monsters from the men. The monsters keep feeding their appetite for violence. The men recognize when it's time to put the gun down and pick up something else. I haven't put the gun down. It's still right there, within reach. That's fine. The frontier's not tame yet, and probably never will be. Having the capacity for violence isn't the problem. Letting it define you is. You're not defined by your Colt anymore, Ethan. You're defined by what you've built here, by the community you've helped create, by the choice you made to be something more than revenge. Cole considered that as the last light faded from the sky. Somewhere in the valley, his cattle grazed peacefully. His hired hands were settling in for the night, probably playing cards and telling lies. Tomorrow, he'd check on the new calves, repair some fencing on the north property line, maybe ride into town for supplies and conversation with neighbors. It was ordinary life, quiet life, the kind of life his parents had lived before violence took them away. And maybe, just maybe, it was enough. Tell me something honestly, Marshall. Do you think I'm a good man? Colton took his time answering, understanding the weight behind the question. I think you're a man who did hard things for reasons most people would understand. I think you made choices that cost you pieces of your soul. I think you're still figuring out who you are now, that revenge isn't driving you. But good? Yeah, I think you're working toward good. And that's all any of us can do. Keep working toward it, knowing we'll never fully arrive, but trying anyway. They sat in comfortable silence as full darkness fell and the stars emerged one by one, distant and cold and indifferent to human struggles. In the valley below, lights flickered in ranch houses and the town, small beacons of civilization holding back the darkness. Ethan Vance, no longer Cole Hartley, no longer the weapon Thorne had forged, just a rancher trying to build something decent in an indecent world, sat on his porch and made peace with the fact that he'd never be the boy he'd been before the Reeves brothers destroyed his family. That boy was gone forever, along with the innocence and certainty he'd possessed. In his place was something harder, more complicated, marked by violence and loss and the knowledge that justice was messy and incomplete and sometimes failed entirely, but also marked by resilience, by the refusal to let the monsters win completely, by the stubborn determination to build something good on ground soaked with blood. The legend they'd tell in Black Ridge Valley for generations was simpler than the truth. A boy whose family was murdered, who disappeared into the wilderness and returned 15 years later as an avenging ghost, who infiltrated and destroyed a criminal empire, who brought justice to a lawless land. They'd leave out the parts that complicated the story, the families he'd failed to save during his infiltration, the moral compromises he'd made, the emptiness that victory brought, the years of learning to be human again after being a weapon for so long. They'd make him a hero, clean and simple and inspirational. But Ethan knew the truth. Heroes were just ordinary men who faced impossible choices and somehow kept going when staying down would have been easier. Heroes were flawed and broken and carried scars that never fully healed. Heroes were people who fought monsters and worried constantly about becoming them, who won their battles but lost pieces of themselves in the process. He was no hero. Just a man who'd survived when survival should have been impossible, who'd fought when fighting seemed futile, who'd chosen to build after spending years destroying. And maybe, in the end, that was enough. As the night deepened and Marshal Colton took his leave, Ethan remained on his porch, his hand resting on the Colt he'd never be without, his eyes scanning the darkness out of habit, his mind finally, at something approaching peace. The ghosts of his parents were still there, always would be. But they'd stopped screaming for vengeance and now simply watched, silent witnesses to what their son had become and what he was still becoming. The Reeves brothers were gone, their empire dismantled, their names becoming cautionary tales, and Black Ridge Valley, freed from their shadow, was slowly becoming what it had always had the potential to be, a place where honest people could build honest lives without fear. Ethan Vance had given 15 years to revenge and another 5 to recovery. He'd become a legend without meaning to, a story that parents would tell their children about justice and persistence and the cost of becoming whatever it takes to fight evil. But the man behind the legend just wanted to be a rancher, to work his land, raise his cattle, contribute to his community, and maybe, eventually, learn to be at peace with the choices he'd made and the man those choices had forged him into. It wasn't the ending he'd imagined. It was better and worse and more complicated than simple revenge ever could have been. It was life. Messy, imperfect, marked by loss, but also by small victories and quiet satisfactions, and the knowledge that he'd done what he'd sworn to do all those years ago when he'd fled into the wilderness. He'd made them pay. The cost had been steep, higher than he'd ever imagined. But as Ethan sat on his porch under the endless frontier stars, listening to the night sounds of his valley now, he thought maybe, just maybe, it had been worth it. Not because revenge had brought him peace, it hadn't. But because he'd proven that even in a world ruled by violence and corruption and men who thought themselves above consequence, justice was still possible. Accountability was still achievable. The monsters could still be brought down. And that knowledge, hard-won and bitterly earned, was something worth the cost of becoming a legend he'd never wanted to be. The frontier night settled around him, vast and dark and beautiful in its indifference. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, more small steps toward whatever peace looked like for a man who'd walked through fire and somehow survived. But tonight, for the first time in 20 years, Ethan Vance allowed himself to simply be. Not a victim, not a weapon, not a ghost or a legend or an instrument of revenge, just a man, scarred and tired and finally home, in a valley that had tried to destroy him and instead had become his salvation. The story of the Reeves brothers and their fall would be told and retold until truth became legend and legend became myth. But the man at the center of it would just keep ranching, keep building, keep trying to be slightly better than he'd been the day before. Because in the end, that was all any man could do: survive, endure, and try to leave the world slightly better than he'd found it, despite all the scars the leaving would cost. And as the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, Ethan Vance closed his eyes and let the darkness take him into sleep. His hand still on his Colt, his soul still marked by fire, but his heart finally, beating with something other than rage. It would have to be enough. It was enough.